Hello everyone, welcome to What If Deku Had Villainous Quirk Called Fear Toxin Part 2. Before we start, please go support Prime A 1999 for writing that awesome fanfic. Chapter 12. So, this is the bomb we're supposed to protect? Momo said as she inspected what they were meant to protect and moved it slightly with relative ease. It appears to be made out of paper mache so we can move it wherever we want. Izuku nodded at her statement, but really couldn't bring himself to fully listen. All he could focus on was what Mineta said in the changing room as it played over and over again. He growled unconsciously at those words. He just wanted right now to rip the little pervert apart. He was brought out of it when he felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see the concerned face of his partner. "Are you alright, Kayama?" "You know," Izuku admitted. "It's just what Mineta said in the changing rooms about Arie that's just got my blood boiling." Jiraiya had a random burst of anger. "Is that connected?" The green-haired boy nodded. "I know her hearing is a lot better than others. May I ask, what did he say?" Izuku told the Ravenet what was said, and to say that Yaoyorozu was mad would be an understatement. The look of pure fury looked out of place on her features. "That is not on," she stated. "We have to tell someone." Izuku nodded. "Me and Kyuka are going to head to Nezu's office after this, but I already have a plan on what to do with him." Momo looked at him questioningly, and he gestured for her to come closer despite being alone. She humored him and leaned forward so he could whisper into her ear. The black-haired girl smirked. "That's a good plan, Kayama, but if we do this," she whispered back. When they were done, they looked at each other with grins that would make Nezu himself weep with pride. They started giggling with each other before it devolved into a truly villainous laugh. They went off to start preposterous. In the observation room, All Might's face darkened and his teeth clenched. He turned around and spoke to the boys and Kyuka. "Is it true what young Kayama said about what happened in the changing rooms with young Mineta?" The boys and Kyuka nodded their heads while the remaining girls looked confused. Seeing their confirmation, they explained what had transpired and what was said. "This will not go unpunished," All Might promised. "After this exam, I will bring him to Nezu to deal with." "Oh, don't worry, All Might, I've got something special planned for him, ha 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 ha." The principal's voice came through the speakers before his manic laughter was cut off. The students and teacher, besides Arie who was watching the screens diligently, shivered in terror and almost felt bad for the purple pervert. Almost. "I'd be more worried about what Izuku might do," Kyuka admitted. She saw the looks she was getting and explained. "For a long time it was just him and Arie, so naturally they are both protective of each other. Plus, angering a father is just a stupid idea," Kaminari said while shaking his head. "Say the wrong things and you better pray that you still have limbs by the end." All Might was really tempted to just call the match, more for the sake of Mineta's physical and mental health than anything, but he had a feeling that Nezu would come down and make the match worse. He just had to hope that Izuku didn't do anything too extreme. "I can't believe I'm stuck with you," Sero said as he rested his head in his hands. "I'm going to be murdered in the process because you couldn't keep your damn perving down." The waiting had been frustrating to the taped quirk user, as the majority of the time that was supposed to be used planning Mineta used to talk about Yaoyorozu's body. Sero had half a mind to just tape him here and just do the exercise by himself just to be rid of his ceaseless ranting about how big Momo's chest was and that it was unfair that he got him instead of a girl. He was also stressing with the fact that he was going up against a very angry father that could make him see his worst fears. In the short time he knew Izuku, Sero came to learn that the boy was incredibly kind, but he was terrified about being caught in the crossfire. He was also going up against a woman who could make anything her mind could conjure, so he couldn't make up his mind on who he'd rather fight against. "We've got this," Mineta waved off, electing a groan from his teammate. "Besides, if they go too far, the match will be over in our favor. Unless they told All Might and he's coming down here to do it himself." Sero muttered but was ignored as the midget went into another tangent about the woman in their class. "If there is a god, please write me out of existence, or at least make me a background character. The hero team can now enter the building." All Might's voice came through their earpieces. They entered the building, and once they did, the door slammed shut behind them. Before they could even see who did it, the power was shut down, turning off the lights. A minute later and the backup power kicked in and the lights shone with a faint red glow. which did help a little with being able to see but not by much, as smoke poured from the vents and covered the floor. They continued their trek through the building until they heard the voices of a woman singing slowly and lightly through the speakers. Ring-a-ring-a-rosies! A pocket full of posies! A tissue, a tissue! We all fall down. They rounded a corner and met with what appeared to be two female children standing in the hall holding hands and singing the creepy song. They wore long baby blue dresses with white bows tied around their waist, and had brown hair that reached to their necks. Slowly they turned around and looked at the two heroes with glazed dead eyes and spoke with voices that were far too creepy. "Have you come to play with us?" they asked as one, their voices devoid of any emotion. Cyril was going to suggest that they don't say anything, but Mineta yelled at them. "Hell bucking no!" Granted, in this situation it would be a reasonable response, but he wondered if the small team forgot who they were up against. The twin girls' eyes rolled into the back of their heads and their mouths opened to an almost impossible degree. That was when two canisters were shot out of their mouths and launched at them, spewing orange smoke behind it. They coughed as their lungs were filled with the gas that was launched at them. What neither of them noticed was that their pupils dilated as they were unwittingly exposed to Izuku's fear gas. Cyril felt something wrap around his waist and looked down to see he's been lassoed and suddenly yanked away from his partner. Mineta looked and saw his partner being dragged into the dark corridor next to them as his nails scraped along the floor and his screams echoed out. Now alone, Mineta looked to where the two girls were but saw that they were gone. He ran through the hall with tears in his eyes before seeing a wonderful sight. A tall, curvy woman with large breasts, a nice round ass, plump lips, and in a tight nurse that had the first few buttons undone to reveal some cleavage. She stood there in a very provocative pose as the purple pervert salivated over the woman in front of him. She smirked lustfully as she undid the rest of the buttons of her uniform and held it closed so he wouldn't see. With a sudden yank where he expected breasts were actually demonic-looking snakes, the woman's appearance changed significantly from the hexy nurse to a walking rotten corpse of an old woman. The snakes lunged at him, caused him to scream in terror and run in the opposite direction only to bump into someone's leg. When he looked up, his skin turned a deathly white at what stood before him. It looked like a monstrous version of Izuku's hero costume, much larger and bulkier than the boy himself, yet somehow skinny to show his ribs, the sack over his head now resembling a creepy leather-like face with a permanent wide-mouthed smile and glowing eyes. More, that leathery skin showed more, with rips in the skin showing the bright orange glow of his inner feet Toxin. It was a truly horrid sight as the monster leaned down and whispered in a dark and twisted version of Izuku's voices. "Are you in?" And so Mineta did. He ran as fast as his little legs could carry him and only barely hearing the next words out of the monster Izuku's mouth. "Lettchmassaccrebgin." Cyril wasn't having a better time with his current living nightmare. He was being chased by Momo in a very realistic Leatherface costume, running after him with a chainsaw that she would occasionally rev. Due to the fear gas he was under, she was unknowingly leading the charge of a horde of blood-soaked Furbies, with some having bits of human flesh and eyes in their mouths. He had a fear of those things ever since he was a child. He got one from his late grandmother, and when he first turned on it said, "Grandma gone." It proceeded to burp, and its eyes rolled into the back of its head. Coincidentally, his grandmother passed away that night, and ever since he had an irrational fear of it. Granted, when he was older he understood it was just a coincidence, but it still remained. He kept running, trying to use his quirk, but to no avail. He didn't know that Yayorozu put a quirk-canceling collar on him without him realizing. "What did I do for this to happen?" he thought to himself as he stumbled around the corner before running once more. "I've been a good boy. All I want is to be a hero. So what did I do to deserve this hell?" He stopped in his tracks when he saw the towering figure of the nightmare Izuku holding a limp Mineta by his head, blood dripping down from his forehead as the monster held him in its clutches. The taped quirk user felt electricity run through his body as Momo tazzed him. Cyril fell forward, letting the embrace of unconsciousness hold him. There was silence before Almight yelled, "Villain team wins!" Momo took off her mask as she looked at the normal Izuku. "What happened to Mineta?" "He fell down the stairs and went unconscious," Izuku said in a sad tone. "Shame, I wanted to torch him more." She nodded at his statement as they went about cleaning up everything they set up. "Your toxin is very potent. I look forward to working with you in the future. Izuku gave her a sly grin. Your quirk is very versatile. I will also look forward to working with you. Everyone just watched the screens as the two villains cleaned up and the heroes were carried away on stretchers. Kyuka had the biggest smug grin while Arie jumped in excitement that her papa won. All Might on the other hand looked at the young child and said, Remind me to never put your father and young Yaoyorozu in a team again. Why not? She asked with a slight tilt of her head. Because this. He gestured to the screens. This wasn't fair at all. Putting someone who can make you see your fears with someone who can make anything just wasn't fair at all. Soon the villain team came back and stood next to the number 1 hero. So, who can tell me who was MVP? Izuku raised his hand. I believe Yaoyorozu should get MVP of this match, sir. All Might looked at him and gestured for him to explain. While yes, my fear Toxin was the key part in the plan, everything else was done by Yaoyorozu. She added parts to the plan that had flaws or could be improved. I can say with confidence that she deserves MVP. All Might nodded in approval while Momo blushed under the praise of her teammate. Soon it was the next team to go. Sorry I couldn't make him suffer more, Izuku said while giving his girlfriend a kiss on the cheek. Kyuka sighed and leaned on him while they watched the next group take their turn. While yes, I'd like to see him mentally tortured more, I have a feeling that you may have scared him in a different way. Izuku chuckled and wrapped an arm around her waist and watched the rest of the teams go. He felt bad for Zero and thought of ways to make it up to him. Chapter 13. Life in UA was going great as far as anyone was concerned. Yesterday's hero versus villain training was still in the minds of 1A. They learned a lot from All Might in that class and an important life lesson. Never put a mad Izuku Kayama and Momo Yaoyorozu on the same team if you value your sanity. Izuku had attempted to apologize to Zero by procuring 2 tickets to Universal Studios Japan. The taped quirk user was grateful for the tickets, and said that he'd take his girlfriend the next time they had a long break. You have a girlfriend? Kaminari asked in surprise, looking Zero up and down before shaking his head. No, don't believe it. I don't know what to tell you. He shrugged. I've been dating her for 2 years now. Really? What's her name? Mina asked, Arie sitting in her lap while the pink-skinned girl put her hair in twin pigtails. India. Fake. Denki and Mina yelled, drawing laughter from the gathered student with Zero crossing his arms with a huff, saying that his girlfriend was real. Izuku, Kyuka and Momo chuckled at Zero's misery as the couple cuddled on the couch. Yaoyorozu sitting next to Izuku's left with Kyuka on his right. The purplet's face scrunched up and asked, Speaking of not believing, I'm surprised to see Mineta's still here. It was true. When the students woke up the next morning they found Mineta as white as snow and shaking. He kept mumbling something about a machine that Nezu had deep in UA's storage room that only he had access to. Granted, it only took him seeing the 1A girls to snap him out of whatever he was in and continued his perving. Izuku nodded. I am surprised as well, I wonder why. I can answer that, Nezu said cheerfully as he popped up from between the sofa cushions. The gathered students screamed as he pulled himself out and stood on the coffee table. Uncle Nezu! Arie yelled as she got off Mina's lap to run over and gave her uncle a hug. Nezu chuckled and returned her hug with a light smile. How are you doing, my little mouse? Nezu chuckled, petting her head before reaching behind his back. I have something for you. Arie tilted her head slightly as if silently asking Nezu what he had and gasped when he pulled out a candy apple from nowhere. She took it from his paws and thanked him before rushing off to sit with Mina once more. You spoil her just as much as my moms do, Izuku said as she shook his head in amusement as he watched his daughter practically inhale the candy. My niece, I get to do what I want, the rat god said with pride before going back to the topic. As for your question about young Mineta, I would have expelled him had I had the opportunity. They all looked at him confused, so he continued. His mother is on the school board and overruled that decision. I did my own research and it turned out that few of his family members are on different school boards. Nezu sighed. After more investigation, I uncovered that the claims of his actions against women of his previous schools were mysteriously dropped or misfiled. Nezu brought out a picture of the woman in question and both Izuku, Kyuka and Arie groaned in frustration. Nezu was surprised by this and asked, Do you know her? Know her? Kyuka scoffed. That hitch has been a thorn in our side before even I joined the cafe. Izuku nodded in agreement as he remembered one instance of that horrid woman. She was a woman of average height with purple hair styled in your average Karen haircut. She came into the cafe when Arie was 3 and started throwing a tantrum about us being out of almond milk. When Arie started crying because of the women's yelling, she grabbed Arie's plush unicorn teddy and ripped its head off before screaming at her to shut up. The young father scowled as the memories of her came into his mind and gestured to Arie to cover her ears. Before she attempted to leave, she turned to me and said that the only thing Arie would be good at in adulthood would be turning tricks in the red light district. The police were called after that because I leapt over the counter and punched her in the face. In an instant, those part of the group and those that had listened and felt rage build up inside as they learned of what the woman said. Even with Nezu's smile, people could tell it was strained and his fur bristled just a bit. Well, we can't really punish him with her still on the board, but don't you worry, I'll deal with her eventually. And with that ominous statement, Nezu walked behind the T.V. Ochako got up from her seat and looked behind it only for nothing to be found. How does he do that? The brunette asked as she looked at her friends. You get used to it, Izuku, Kyuka and Arie said, though the couple said it with dead eyes and faces that said that they were done with shit. Meanwhile, the young girl said it happily and with a beaming smile. The amount of times Nezu randomly popped up at their cafe caused them to look to see if he had somehow tunneled his way from UA to there. He even scared the health inspector one day and almost caused them to be shut down thinking they had rats. It was waved off, of course, after finding out that it was just UA's principal, but they came dangerously close. Come on, everyone! We're gonna be late for class! Ida yelled as he ran out the door. Everyone got up and started walking to school. Arie ran up to Yaoyorozu and asked if she could walk with her. Izuku smiled as he watched the taller girl shine almost like Aoyama before picking up the young girl and carrying her. Unfortunately, the way she picked up the child and thanks to some untimely gust of wind caused Izuku and Kyuka to have a free view up her skirt. Izuku managed to tear his eyes away from the sight to look at his girlfriend and saw her still staring with a blush on her cheeks and a trickle of blood dripping from her nose. Kyuka also looked at her boyfriend and saw him in a similar state that she was in. They silently glanced back at Yaoyorozu, who had straightened back up before looking at each other again, and exchanged a silent statement. We'll talk about this later. In the Class A homeroom, Aizawa was standing at the podium with a sheet of paper in his hands. Decent work on combat training yesterday, you guys. I saw the video feeds and went through each of the team's results. Mineta, Aizawa said to the class before he glanced at the class pervert who looked up shaking in his seat. As much as I hate to say it, you have some modicum of talent, but you have to let go of this stupid perversion that you have, otherwise you'll end up in a cell with the very villains you put away. From what was reported to me about what happened yesterday, and what you said about Arie, you'll be serving detention until I say otherwise. Do I make myself clear? Aizawa said with a glare. Mineta didn't even respond to him, he just nodded his head before quickly averting his gaze. Kiyama and Yaoyorozu, Aizawa called out. Nice job on your teamwork and quirks yesterday, but please refrain from giving your fellow classmates PTSD, okay? Yes, sir, Momo acknowledged. I make no promises, Izuku said with a grin. That's as good as I'm gonna get, isn't it? Upon receiving a nod from the green-haired boy, Aizawa sighed and mumbled something about Nezu's illegitimate spawned child before addressing the class. Alright. Now let's get down to business. Our first task will decide your future. Is it another quirk test? The majority of the class thought as tense in anticipation of what he might say next. You all need to pick a class representative. Aizawa finished what he said. Oh good. Just normal school stuff, the class sighed in almost comical relief. Pick me, guys. I want to be the class rep, Kirishima yelled. I'll take it, Kaminari said with his hand raised. Yeah, nah, you're gonna need me, Jiraiya said with her hand raised as well. Someone with style would be the... Aoyama was saying his option suggestion but was cut off by Mina. I'm totally the right pick, Mina yelled. Everyone wants to be class rep, Izuku thought nervously while he looked around the room. Silence, everyone! Please! Everyone stopped and turned to Ida, who was standing. A class representative's duty is to lead others. That's not something that anyone can do. You must first have the trust of everyone in the classroom. Therefore, the most logical way to fill the position is with democracy. We will hold an election to choose our leader. Is this really the best idea? Kaminari asked. Wouldn't everyone just vote for themselves? Kirishima said, pointing out the one big flaw in Ida's suggestion. Most people will. But whoever receives the most votes is the one who is most suited for the job. It's the best way, right, sir? Ida said while turning to Aizawa, who was in his sleeping bag. Do what you want. Just decide before my nap's over. Aizawa tiredly said before falling to the floor, and before sleeping replied. And no, I'm nipping this in the bud now. You can't make Arie the class republic. The mood dropped slightly as some had planned on doing just that. Luckily, Mina asked. Can we at least make her the class mascot? Aizawa thought about it and considered the pros and cons. Yes. Thank you for your trust, Ida said while chopping his arms robotically. A person who fits being a leader, Izuku thought. He instinctively looked back and glazed at Momo. After a few minutes the class submitted their votes, and it took a few more minutes to count them up, and Aizawa revealed who were the ones that got the most votes. How did I get 6 votes? Izuku yelled with his head on the cafeteria's table, when the votes came back, and he was surprised that he ended up with votes. He knew that Kyuka probably voted for him, and he definitely knew that Arie did as well, but the other 4 remained a mystery. When the bell rang and everyone piled in for lunch, Izuku found a table for him and everyone to sit at. Man, this rice is so good, Uraraka said as she ate her lunch. Congratulations on becoming class representative, Kiyama, Ida said to Izuku. At the table there was Izuku, Ida, Uraraka, Siro, Mina, Momo, Kyuka and Arie were sitting at one table together. But I must say that I'm surprised that you were not chosen to be class representative, Yaoyorozu. I know, I'm a little disappointed since I always wanted the job, but I'm glad that I can work with Kiyama so I can help him out with the job, Momo said and smiled at Izuku. I still don't think I'm quite qualified to be class rep, Ida. Do you want the position? Izuku asked Ida in hopes to give it away to someone else. No, while I did want to be it. I cannot take your position from Yukiyama since me and 5 others voted for you, Ida said. Wait, you voted for me? Why? Izuku asked. Your courage and quick thinking under stress will make you a worthy leader. Not to mention the strength and plans you displayed yesterday. That's the reason I chose you, Ida said. Yup, that's why I voted for you too, Uraraka said happily. You too? Izuku asked. Yeah, you had a cool plan in the training yesterday and you handled things. That and that little cutie made me her aunt, so that makes us family, Uraraka said. Oh, well, that solves the first 3. So who are the others? Izuku wondered. Mina raised her hand as well. Me! And surprisingly for the same reasons as Uraraka, she said as she threw an arm around Uraraka, making the brunette blush heavily. Momo nodded her head and smiled brightly, causing Izuku and Kyuka to blush slightly. I voted for you because you're a good leader. I personally want to see what you can do. And you know for a fact that me and Arie voted for you, Mop Top, Kyuka said with a grin. Who'd you vote for? Yaoyorozu, he said, unaware of the blush on the Ravenette's face, but did hear her squeak in surprise. It was thanks to her additions to the plan that we were able to secure a win. I voted for her as well, Siro said and shivered slightly. But did you have to make the chainsaw and those little creepy girl animatronics? Izuku and Momo looked at each other before replying in unison. What little girl animatronics? The ones that shot your fear grenades. What are you on about? We didn't make anything that could deploy them, Izuku said, confused at what the taped quirk user was talking about. I don't remember making animatronics, just a smoke machine to add to the ambience, Momo added while looking at a rapidly paling Siro. Are you feeling all right? You look pale. This was all a lie, of course, because they did make those female animatronics, and Momo was even the one to suggest that they make them look like the twins from The Shining. They also agreed that they'd lie and say to anyone that they didn't make them to mess with people and make them think the school is haunted. Of course, Kyuka and Arie caught on to their plan and played along, Unbeknownst to all, alone in his office, Nezu was cackling away to himself as he thought up all the possible ways to buck with his staff with the animatronics that were currently in the corner of his room. Before anything else could be said, an alarm screeched, causing Kyuka to cover her ears due to her sensitive hearing and Arie to do the same because of the noise. Luckily, Momo saw this and created noise-canceling headphones for them, which they were grateful for. Warning! Level 3 security breach. All students evacuate the building in an orderly fashion. A female voice spoke through the speaker systems. The students ignored the instruction and instead started running like headless chickens. What's a level 3 security breach? Ida asked a student that was running past their table. That means someone managed to get past the school's wall. This hasn't happened in my 3 years here. Run away! The student exclaimed before running like the rest. Let's get out of here! Mina yelled as the Class 1A students were running down the halls, as every student was squished in the hall as they were trying to leave the building. Kyuka was in the stampede and tried to push away a few students out of her way, but she felt softness on the back of her head. She quickly noticed that Momo's bosoms were pressing against her head, while Izuku had been somehow slammed into her front, causing Kyuka to be sandwiched between the two, with Izuku's face going into Yaoyorozu's chest. The tall girl looked down and saw Izuku's and Kyuka's eyes were swirling in comedic fashion as she quickly realized what was happening, and all three had blushes on their faces. They quickly separated from each other, though Kyuka let out an inaudible whimper at having the warmth gone. Mama! Papa! Hello! When they heard Arie's voice call from the chaos of students, and that she had somehow been separated from them, caused them to panic, but once they heard her getting hurt, the young couple lost it. Enough! They yelled at the top of their lungs. If that didn't stop the mob of students, then the absolute malice that promised death that rolled off them did. They shoved students out of the way until they made it to their daughter, who was currently clutching her foot. Kyuka picked her up while Izuku leveled a glare at everyone there. You call yourselves Yui students? Running around in a panic when you should be helping your fellow body out. Did you forget that the school is crawling with heroes as teachers, including Almight? You were so focused on yourselves that you didn't see a little girl being trapped and trampled on. The hall was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Fortunately, Ida announced that it was merely the press that had triggered the alarm. As everyone began to leave in silence, Izuku, Kyuka and Momo tended to Arie, who explained that a blonde boy had stamped on her foot. Classes were cancelled that day and allowed the students to return to their dorms. Later that night, Izuku and Kyuka were lying in their bed with only a table lamp next to them illuminating the room. They had already put Arie to bed and now was as good as any to talk about what had happened that morning. About this morning, they said at the same time. They giggled and Izuku said that Kyuka could go first. About what happened this morning with Yaoyorozu and in the cafeteria, you felt that, didn't you? Yeah, got a face full actually, Izuku joked. Not that idiot. Kyuka swatted his chest and chuckled. But I'm being serious, is this just a spur-of-the-moment thing or is it something more? Izuku sighed and turned to the side to look at her properly. I don't know, for all I know this could just be hormones and nothing more, but if this is something more, what do we do? They remained silent after that, with Kyuka turning over and hugging her boyfriend. They stayed like that before Izuku spoke again. Whatever this is, it's something we'll deal with at another time. If it does become serious and we do have feelings for Yaoyorozu, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I just don't want it to be a situation where we fight for each other's affection like some dumb harem anime, Kyuka admitted. It would tear my heart if we fought for that. Mine, hers, yours, it doesn't matter. I'm scared of this tearing us apart. I'm scared of you leaving me. When those words left her mouth, Izuku did something that she was not expecting. He smacked her upside the head and gave her an angry look. If you ever think I'll leave you for someone else again, then you won't be leaving this bed until I've convinced you otherwise. Kyuka Jairu, I love you more than you'll ever know, Izuku continued. You are one of the lights in my life and will continue to be from now till the day I die. You are one of the people that was there for me in my darkest days and the person that one day I wish to marry. If you think I'd ever stop loving you because of your body or because someone else comes along, then you're an idiot. Because I'll never stop loving and finding new things to love about you. Tears welled up in her eyes and smashed her lips into his in a love-filled kiss. Izuku held her by the waist and rolled until she was on top of him, where she giggling into his mouth. So, you won't be leaving this bed until I've convinced you otherwise. How about we skip that part? Then it's a good thing Arie's fast asleep and the room is soundproof, he said before whispering huskily into her ear. But that won't stop me from making you scream my name, and we won't stop till we get a noise complaint. From there the room was filled with nothing but love and moans, but unbeknownst to them a curtain ravenet was having similar thoughts in her room, thinking about how her heart fluttered when she spoke or looked at Izuku or Kyuka and how it yearns when she thought about them. The three had a rough time sleeping that night, but for completely different reasons. Chapter 14. It was a quiet Sunday for all in the 1A dorms, as every member of the class was doing something to pass the time. Some stayed in their rooms while some socialized with each other and decided to go outside and touch some grass. Izuku and Kyuka were in the kitchen making a recipe that they found online for peppermint patties. Izuku was excited that he could potentially make these himself and not have to buy them. Arie meanwhile was sitting next to Kaminari, Tokoimi and Ibara as she played Minecraft with them. It had turned out that they technically already knew each other because they played on the same server together and were neighbors in the game. Just as Izuku put the peppermints into the fridge, everyone heard a high-pitched scream coming from Yue. They looked outside to see President Mike running from the school screaming his head off. "Demon girls!" he screamed as he continued to run far from the school, followed shortly behind by Midnight, 13, Vlad King and surprisingly Hound Dog, who were also running like their lives depended on it with faces of fear. Izuku looked to one of the school's windows and saw the shining animatronics looking at the fleeing heroes with their lifeless eyes. He felt his phone buzz, signifying that he had received a text. "Rat God, these are the best gifts I've received in a very long time." Izuku briefly wondered if it was a good idea to let Nezu have those things. Right when that thought entered his mind, he received another text. "Rat God, like you'd be able to stop me from getting them, smiley face." Mistakes might have been made, Izuku thought as he pocketed his phone. When he and Kyuka turned around, they saw a blushing Momo standing there looking a little embarrassed. "Everything okay, Yayorozu?" "Everything's fine, Kayama, it's just..." Her blush deepened. "I want to explore the local area, but I don't know anything about it." Izuku looked at Kyuka and nodded at each other before looking at the tall girl. "We can show you around if you want," Kyuka said. "Really?" the Ravionette asked, but when she received a nod from them she immediately brightened up and pulled the two into a hug, unintentionally smothering them. "Thank you so much!" "And no problem, Yayorozu," Izuku said when she let them go again, allowing them to catch their breaths. He looked at his daughter on the couch. "We're going out, Arie, you wanna come?" "No thanks, Papa." Arie shook her head before pointing at Kaminari, Tokoemi and Ibara. "I want to stay with Uncle Kami, Uncle Toko, Uncle Shadow and Auntie Ibara." Ibara froze for a moment before hugging the little unicorn child with all her might. To her it felt like an angel came down from heaven itself, and told her she was doing a good job. The feathers around Tokoemi's cheeks ruffled a bit as he clutched his heart, while saying, "How is it possible for her light to penetrate the eternal darkness?" Dark Shadow came out and hugged his new niece just as hard as the vine-haired girl. "Best niece ever!" Kaminari just chuckled and ruffled his niece's heart. Arie leaned into it, and everyone could have sworn that they heard her start purring. "Okay, Arie, just be good, okay?" Kyuka said with a chuckle, taking her boyfriend's hand and walking to the door with Momo in tow. "Bye, Mama!" "Bye, Papa!" Arie waved off before going back to playing with her uncles and aunt. Ibara looked at the clock on the wall and sighed. "I'm afraid I must leave shortly as well." Arie looked at Ibara in confusion, so she continued. "My church is holding a charity event, and I volunteered to help." "Can I go too?" the little unicorn asked with her big ruby eyes filled with excitement. The vine-haired girl chuckled as she petted Arie on the head. "I see no problem with it, my dear." Ibara smiled happily to herself as she strolled down the street with Arie holding her right hand. According to the little girl, this would be her first time at a church, and she was very excited. Holding Arie's other hand was Kaminari, who was busy talking to the young girl about some of his friends at a local skate park, promising Arie that he'd teach her how to ride a board, and if her parents allowed him to take her to the park he would. Ibara watched the scene with a warm smile on her face as Denki told the young girl what an ollie was. To her it kinda felt like they were a small family. That made her heart skip a beat and caused her to burst into a blushing mess as the thought crept into her mind, What also invaded her mind was a scenario of Denki in a suit looking at her with a warm smile near an altar with Arie being the ring bearer didn't help much. She gently slapped her burning cheeks with some of her vines and shook her head to dispel the thought, though a light blush still remained as they continued their calm walk. "So Shiozaki, what's this charity about?" Denki asked. "It's to raise awareness for the quirkless and those that have weak or villainous quirks," Ibra explained. "Due to some less-hearted individuals, some don't know of the struggles that they go through, especially the quirkless." "I hear that." Kaminari nodded with a look of disgust. He had seen how bad discrimination for those groups could be, and he should know, as he was bullied for having a weak quirk due to it making him stupid. Now with the story Izuku gave of his and Arie's treatment from those that saw him as a villain, it just angered him more. "How much further are we from the church?" "Just round the corner." They turned the corner and came face to face with the church that Ibra was leading them to. Out in front were people selling stuff that was given to the church like clothes and old toys. There were also those that were selling food that was freely baked. On the other side was people face painting and even a little play going on. "Nice to see you came, Miss Shiozaki." A man dressed like a priest walked over with a kind smile. He looked at her two guests. "And who might these be?" "Hello, father," Ibra greeted. "This is Denki Kaminari. He's a classmate of mine, and this is Arie." "Are you Auntie Ibra's papa?" Arie asked and tilted her head in an adorable manner. As she looked at the man in front of her, she looked to Ibra. "Is he my grandpa?" Ibra looked at the young girl confused before understanding. "No, he isn't my actual father. We just call him that." "Hey, why don't we go and see what's here?" Denki said to Arie. She nodded in excitement, and they walked off, leaving Ibra and the priest to themselves. "I was unaware that you were an aunt. Congratulations," the man said kindly. "Who does the child belong to?" "She's the daughter of two other classmates, Izuku Kiyama and Kyuka Jiru," she said before explaining the situation that involved the child and Izuku. The priest nodded solemnly but with a small smile. "It is a shame to be handed this fate, but he has proven that when he passes he has earned his spot in heaven," he said. "To think he had to grow up faster than one should because of a villain and took in a child of God all by himself. It's nothing short of inspiring, is it not?" Ibra agreed with his statement before spotting a costume on one of the nearby stalls that they were standing next to. Just as she grabbed it, Arie came running back with Kaminari and handed her a candy apple they bought. She gratefully took it before an idea came to her and held the costume in front of the child to get an idea of how it would look on her. "What do you think? Would Kiyama and Jiru like it?" Kaminari and the priest looked at the young girl. The priest said a short prayer while the electric quirk user turned to Ibra and rested a hand on her shoulder. "I think you're gonna kill them." Kyuka had to withhold a snort as she watched Izuku talk excitedly to an equally excited Momo about a hero fight that happened on these streets a few years ago. It was honestly amusing to see the two nerding out for some reasons that were beyond her understanding. She loved her nerd of a boyfriend. It was one of the reasons she fell for him. But seeing him rant off his knowledge to their friend was something else. She had felt right at home with Izuku and was perfectly happy with him, but with Momo also being there just felt right. Like a jigsaw that was missing a piece was now found. They had agreed that if these feelings for the Yaoyorozu heiress were indeed real and not just hormones, that they'd wait. They didn't want to scare Momo away and ruin their friendship if their feelings were false. They rounded a corner, and to the young couple's surprise, Momo squealed. Ahead of them was a bookstore that was called Read M, and Weep, that had their books on discount. Momo grabbed their hands and dragged them towards the bookstore. Izuku and Kyuka could have easily broken out of her grasp but wanted to see what was happening. Once they entered, the raven-haired beauty bounced from bookshelf to bookshelf with a look that their daughter would make when they would tell her that they brought some candy apples home. The couple giggled at Momo's excitement over the books, causing her to realize what she was doing, and blushed in embarrassment. They walked to the Yaoyorozu heiress, who rubbed her arm and looked to the side to avoid their teasing grins. "Sorry about that, I just love books, and when there's a new bookstore that I've never been to I kinda get excited." "It's fine, Yaoyorozu." Izuku waved off before nudging his girlfriend. "You should see Kyuka when a new music shop opens up." Kyuka crossed her arms and huffed before grinning at Izuku. "You mean the same reaction when a new hero comes on screen and you and Arie start going into a rant about them?" Izuku rolled his eyes with a playful tisk when they heard a snort. They looked at Momo, who was barely holding her laughter. The couple looked at each other with smiles on their faces and continued looking around the aisles. They did find some great books for themselves and were reading some over each other's shoulders. Momo was constantly fawning over the romance options while Kyuka favored those about bands. Izuku meanwhile was interested in the comic section and was looking for some for Arie and him to read. They rarely left each other's sides and were practically shoulder to shoulder with each other. They eventually left, though they had to drag Momo out before she decided to just live there and moved on. It was hot outside, so they decided to get some ice cream at a local ice cream parlor that Izuku knew. When they entered, the woman behind the counter grinned at the trio. She had long white hair, icy blue eyes, and wore blue lipstick. Well, look who decided to finally pay a visit! Izuku scratched the back of his head with a nervous chuckle. Sorry, Mrs. Fries, it has been a while, hasn't it? She chuckled as looked at Kyuka and nodded at her. Good to see you too, Kyuka. Sup, Kyuka greeted before gesturing to the ravenet next to her. This is our new friend Momo Yayorozu. Hello, Mrs., it's a pleasure to meet you, Momo said. Nora Fries, welcome to mine and my husband's little ice cream parlor, she greeted back. How is Victor? Izuku asked. Currently with our daughter in the back. I tell you, she's a real troublemaker, she is. The mother sighed. Though I am grateful that he's not out there causing havoc anymore. So what can we get you three today? Victor said as he pulled out an ice cream scooter. Izuku ended up ordering raspberry ripple, Kyuka chose mint, while Momo chose chocolate and left after paying. It was only then that Momo asked what Nora meant by her husband causing havoc. Victor used to be the villain known as Mr. Freeze. He did crimes with his ice quirk to get money so he could find a cure to his wife's illness, Izuku revealed. He eventually stopped and gave up the life of crime when he finally found the cure. Momo nodded and smiled as they continued walking. To her it sounded like one of her love stories that she read. The thought of her love stories caused her mind to crash for a moment as she thought about today's events. Going out and having ice cream with the people who your heart beats for sounded all too familiar. Did I just get taken on a date? She screamed in her head as her cheeks became very hot. Back at the dorms, the students watched the door in anticipation for the trio to come back. Off to the side, Recovery Girl stood by as she tapped her foot. I still don't understand why you asked me to be here. Granted, there haven't been any emergencies, but I thought this would be important. The old heroine huffed. Trust us, Recovery Girl, you're gonna wanna be here, Mina said as she looked out the window and saw the three walking to the door. They're here! The door opened and they stepped in. They looked around confused as to why they all looked nervous and why the university's nurse was there. Hey guys, what's going on? Kyuka said as she looked at everyone. Kaminari and Shiozaki took Arie out today because Shiozaki volunteered to help at her church, rub it, Tsu said before continuing. They came back home and Arie wanted to show you what they bought her. Just then the sounds of tiny footsteps came rushing down the stairs, and before long Arie came into full view. She smiled brightly at her parents as they saw what she was wearing. She wore a white dress with gold trimming along the bottom of the dress and the short sleeve. White dove-like wings were on her back and a golden halo was on top of her head being held by a pole. What do you think, Mama? Papa? She said excitedly as everyone swore that they saw a beam of light shine onto the young girl, giving her an almost heavenly appearance. Izuku and Kyuka just looked at their smiling daughter before stiffly collapsing to the floor as their souls tried to leave their bodies. Recovery Girl rushed to their sides, muttering to herself that now she understood why she was there. All the while Arie remained oblivious to what just happened. Chapter 15. The next day class was in session and everyone was wondering what they would be learning today. All that anyone knew was that it was something to do with the bus that was outside the school sometime in the afternoon. This gave everyone a chance to relax for a bit before they had to leave. Izuku was sitting on the couch when from the corner of his eye he saw Mina and Denki trying to sneak upstairs. Did you two do the dishes like I asked? He called out to them, giving them pause as they were just caught. Receiving no reply and assuming that they didn't, so he asked a different question. Did you at least do your homework? The two looked at each other before looking at the stairs, planning to run. Izuku saw this and looked at them fully. Don't even think about it. His first warning was unheard as they put one foot on the first step. Izuku stood up and took off his shoes to point one of them at the two. I will send you to Jesus. This threat was unheard as the two quickly tried to flee up the stairs. Sadly for them, Izuku was faster, as he launched his first shoe at Denki and the second at Mina. They connected to the back of their heads, causing them to stumble and fall face first to the floor. He picked them up and dropped them in one of the corners of the room and left them there to serve their punishment. Those in the room watched this and shook their heads at the two idiots. You'd think they'd learned from the last time, Uraraka said as she sighed. Zero kept quiet as he watched the scene unfold and also saw Izuku walk over to Tsuyu to help her with a piece of homework that she was struggling with. He thought for a moment before asking what felt like a dumb question. Is it me or does Kayama kinda act like a dad? They looked at the tape user with deadpan expressions, so Zero quickly amended what he meant. I don't just mean Arie, I mean he acts like a dad to us. When we have problems with homework, he's always there to help. If we are upset, he's the first to comfort us. He cooks for us. He set up a chore schedule. Hell, I've seen him play catch with Koda. Now that you say it, he does do that a lot, Ochako said. That's because of Arie, Kyuka explained as she was flipping through some TV channels. Due to how long he had to raise her by himself, he can't switch off dad mode, as I call it. So he's always in dad mode? Toru asked, receiving a nod from Kyuka. She thought for a moment before saying, all in favor of Kayama being dubbed class dad, say aye. What? Izuku yelled with a red face. Aye. Most of the class yelled with teasing grins. All opposed? Toru asked, knowing who would say no. No. The ayes haven't it. There was laughter from everyone, and it got worse when Izuku bashed his head into the wall. Giving up, he threw his hands up into the air and went back to his room to sulk. Seeing the perfect opportunity to tease, Mina yelled, Dad! You are not calling him daddy. Kyuka quickly shot her down. Why? Because it's what you call him? Mina said with a playful glare, but all she got was a Cheshire cat grin from the purplet. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at her friend. You don't call him that, right? You're just bucking with me. Kyuka didn't answer and just kept grinning. She stood up and walked up the stairs after her boyfriend. Mina looked to Uraraka and silently asked if she was being messed with. The brunette just shrugged, not knowing either. Later that afternoon, the students gathered in the classroom and talked amongst themselves until the door opened to reveal Aizawa, who shuffled his way to the stand. His tired eyes gazed over the class as they had fallen silent the moment he opened the door. Good, you're learning to not waste time, he huffed. Today you'll be doing something a bit different. Today we're going to an off-site training facility for rescue training. He pressed a button and their costume cases popped out. He turned and walked out the door while saying, You can wear your costumes if you want, or don't, I don't really care too much. They gathered their things and got changed into their hero costumes, but when they were outside they saw Nezu standing there with Midnight. Immediately Mineta started drooling over his mom, so he sent him an annoyed glare to shut him up. What's going on? Why is Midnight and the principal here? Ochako asked in confirmation. We're here for Arie, Midnight answered while picking up the small child, moving her cape so that she wouldn't be sitting on it. The USJ is no place for a child. Nezu shook his head. Due to the different disaster zones, she could be at risk of being injured. But I wanted to go with Papa and Mama, Arie said, saddened at the fact she couldn't watch her parents be heroes. We'll be fine, sweetie, Izuku said as he and Kyuka came over and kissed her horn, earning a giggle from their daughter. He leaned in and whispered in her ear. Besides, you get to spend the day with Uncle Nezu and Grandma. Her eyes shined with excitement as she attempted to pull Izuku and Kyuka into a hug, but with her short arms she couldn't really do it. Good luck, Papa! Mama! They chuckled and hugged her back. After saying goodbye, they turned back to the bus where Ida was trying to organize everyone into the vehicle. Izuku just walked onto the bus. If it's good enough for Aizawa, then it's good enough for me. Ida was about to protest and say that they needed to be orderly, but when he saw the layout of the bus he just sat down while feeling defeated. The rest soon boarded the bus and were soon on their way. The ride was fairly quiet, with the students talking amongst themselves and discussing topics that they were interested in. Izuku and Kyuka sat next to each other and listened to some music on her phone. While he was listening to the music, he was scrolling through some news articles that had caught his attention. Trigger-related crimes on the rise. Swipe. American white woman arrested in the United Kingdom for making tea with a microwave. Swipe. America's number 35 ranked hero Florida man was fined for trying to take an alligator from its enclosure to take it home and fix his car. Swipe. Breaking news: massive surge in villain activity in the Mustafa area. All Might spotted on multiple scenes, but the attacks keep coming with no sign of slowing. Expect heavy traffic in the area as All Might gets the situation under control. The Greenette frowned as he read that. There had been a lot of attacks that morning, and to him it felt almost like a distraction, before he could dwell on it any further, so you got his attention. I often speak my mind, but I've been very curious about your quirk, Kiyama. Really? What would you like to know about Arie? Just call me Tsuyu or Tsu, only people I consider friends do, ribbit. The fellow Greenette said before continuing. I'm just curious if it is possible to break out of your toxin. Izuku pondered for a moment, as he hadn't really thought about it before. I mean, it might be possible. If you face your fear, then you might break out, but I've never tested it out before. What about people who don't fear anything? Kirishima said as he had been listening in on the conversation. Everybody fears something, Izuku said, turning to face the redhead. If you meet someone who says they fear nothing, then you have met a liar. As long as you keep that toxin away from me, then we're good, dude, Ciro stated. Actually, Ciro, what did it smell like? Mina asked, earning some stares aimed at her direction. What? I'm curious. It smelled like pine, actually, the tape quirk user said. Why does it smell like pine, Kiyama? Why can you shoot tape from your elbows? Fair enough. The conversation quickly turned to other topics, and before they all knew it, they were standing outside of the USJ where they will be conducting their rescue training. Standing outside of the giant dome-shaped building was 13 in her hero suit. She locked eyes with Izuku and gave him a small wave. He waved back at his mother, and heard a light squeal coming from Ochako. Izuku almost forgot that she was just as big of a 13 nerd as his daughter was. Where's All Might? Aizawa asked the space hero. He was supposed to be here for today's lesson. You haven't seen the news? Mustafa is in chaos right now. He's putting down villain after villain, but they just keep coming, 13 whispered. Aizawa sighed in frustration at the situation. He couldn't exactly blame the guy this time, as there had been a lot of villain attacks, but it was still annoying nonetheless. Let's see, before we get started, let me say one thing or two, or... 13 started. Aizawa fake coughed. Several, he whispered before fake coughing again. Several things, the space case hero clarified before continuing. Some of you may be aware of my quirk. What you might not be aware of is how easily it can kill, she said, sucking the levity out of the conversation in an instant. Take my quirk, for example. It is really useful for rescue work and clearing up debris, but it can also be used to kill if I'm not careful. This is something you must be especially aware of while using your quirks to rescue, since the people in danger will likely already be gravely hurt. That's all, thank you for listening. After a round of applause, Aizawa said, Alright, let's. The lights encircling the dome flickered. A blast door slammed close over the exit. Eraserhead and 13 whirled to look as well to the center of the facility, their years of experience shining through. A swirling purple vortex appeared and began expanding in size before people began streaming out of the purple mist. There were easily hundreds of them. A man wearing severed hands all across his body and covering his face like a macabre mask exited the apparent portal first. He was quickly followed by a hulking, beaked abomination with an exposed brain. It had to be twice as tall as All Might. It had scars in its black skin where its hide had failed to contain its bulging muscles. The mist dissipated and reformed into a sharply dressed humanoid shape with glowing yellow eyes. The man with the severed hands held his arms wide and said with a cruel voice, Looks like the fodder are doing their jobs. Alarms aren't triggering. Communication to the main campus has been severed. Simulations aren't responding. 13 yelled as she typed away at a panel in the forearm of their suit. Is this part of the test? Kirishima asked, a little worried. Eraserhead pulled his goggles into place over his eyes. No, those are real villains. 13 protect the students. Izuku grabbed his arm before he could jump, and Aizawa turned his head to look at him. Be safe. Aizawa knew what he meant. He would not die and leave Nemuri. Hisashi, or anyone he loves. He nodded at Izuku and jumped into the fray, leaving his students to escape. Izuku immediately took charge and ordered everyone to start running to the entrance. Sadly, before they could even make it, the path was blocked by the purple mist villain. Almight was supposed to be here today. Maybe the schedule was incorrect, but no matter. Greetings, I am Kurojiri, and we are the League of Villains. The mist villain spoke politely. Forgive our rudeness, but we have come here to Yue, the bastion of heroism, to end the life of Almight, the symbol of peace. Izuku's mind began racing as he tried to think of a way out, but nothing was coming to him. We just need to think of a strategy, and just blindly jump at him with no plan. Then Kirishima blindly jumped at the villain with the plan to just punch him really hard. Before his fist even connected, he was teleported back to the rest of the students. Kirishima! Izuku yelled as he tried to help him, but it was too late. Kurojiri had enough of those there, and sent his portals to scatter everyone across the USJ. Izuku tried desperately to reach for Kyuka but couldn't as he was sucked through the portal. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the fear on his girlfriend's face. Chapter 16. Normally Haruki was a calm and collected woman that was not prone to fits of rage. However, when her students and her son were teleported to God knows where to presumably be killed by the invading villains, she lost it. She made sure that the students that weren't teleported away were behind her. She unleashed the full might of her black hole quirk. She hoped that Izuku and Kyuka were still alive, because if they died and made Arie an orphan, she would make sure that Kurojiri would receive a slow and painful death. Unlike her wife, she had very little in the way of combat experience due to the fear of her own quirk accidentally killing someone. That wouldn't stop her, however, from making sure this villain stayed down. Haruki was successful in stalling him, but he got the better of her by opening a warp gate right behind her, letting her quirk base through. It ripped the back of her costume apart, and she screamed in pain when she felt the pain coursing on her back. Subconsciously she sat off her quirk, but the pain proved to be too much as she soon passed out. I'm sorry, Namuri Izuku. Her last thoughts were of her family before slipping into unconsciousness, and the vague sounds of engines rushing past her. Kyuka came to the conclusion that today was utter shit, as it should have been the day that they would have a relatively peaceful rescue training session. Instead, she was falling through a portal from a villain that just had to attack the USJ for whatever reason to be sent to their possible deaths. She landed on a rocky surface with a thud and groaned as she lifted herself up. Looking around, she spotted Momo and Denki picking themselves up. Just as she was about to ask if they were all right and where they were, villains started to appear around them. A few got into battle stance while others ogled at the two females, more specifically Momo. Kaminari grunted as he finally stood up and looked at the punk girl. How would you describe your life right now? Because I'd say mine's pretty bucked. Like a poorly written fanfiction, Kyuka said as she glared at the villains that were surrounding them. Momo blinked a few times before looking at her friend. That was oddly specific, she said as she handed her a sword that she had created. You need anything, Kaminari? Nah, I'm good, he yelled as electricity sparked around his body. With a war cry, the fight began as Kaminari shot off bolts of electricity at his opponents while Momo created a shotgun for herself and fired it at one of the villain's stomach. The sound rang out and everyone looked on with shocked expressions before realizing that it was just a beanbag round. Recocking her shotgun, she cast her steeled gaze on the other villains. When she saw that they were looking at her with looks of slight fear, she just gave them a smile before taking aim once more. The Yaoyorozu heiress looked over to Kyuka and saw her clashing blades with another villain. What are you doing, Jairu? Mastering the bucking blade, apparently, she yelled as she stabbed the villain in the leg and kicked him in the face. How are you holding up? I'm doing as well as I can, though I should thank Mother and Father for teaching me how to use firearms, Momo said as she dropped to more villains and shot one that tried to sneak up on Kaminari. When I give the signal, I'll need you to run at me, alright? What signal? You'll know when you see it. Just then the back of the Ravenette's costume started expanding before a massive blanket made from some material that Kyuka couldn't discern. Taking it as her signal, the purplet ran as fast as she could and got under the blanket when Momo yelled for Kaminari to fire everything he's got. He complied by firing off electricity everywhere and electrocuting all the villains around him. That was honestly a smart move there, Yaoyorozu, Kyuka complimented as she turned to look at her friend. I honestly wouldn't have thought about boobs. Due to her ripping the top portion of her costume apart, it left Momo with nothing to cover her magic chest. She felt all her blood go to her cheeks and out her nose as she gawked at her friend's melons. She turned around and covered the Yaoyorozu heiress with her body so then Kaminari wouldn't be able to see, though a large part of her brain was screaming for her to turn back around as it had missed the free show. "It's okay, Jairu. I can just make a new one," Momo said, acting oblivious as a small part of her, for a reason she couldn't explain, was happy that her friend got to look at her. Fortunately for both, when the electric quirk user fired off that blast, he seemed to go into a form of stupid mode. The sight of his dumb expression, while given 2 thumbs up, caused Kyuka to snort before she doubled over laughing. Momo just shook her head as her new costume was created around her before she noticed some movement from behind the yellow-haired boy. "Kaminari, look out!" Whether he could understand them or not, it didn't matter, as a villain grabbed Kaminari and pointed a finger at his temple. "I don't want to harm a fellow electric quirk user, but I can't afford to be arrested." They were in a stalemate because they couldn't attack, as they ran the risk of hurting Kaminari, and the villain knew that. The villain couldn't leave or hand him over, otherwise they would attack. Kyuka tried to distract him by talking about how his quirk was worth more than being a villain, while sneaking an earphone jack to her boot, but was stopped when his fingers sparked with electricity. He had seen right through her words and knew what she was trying to do. Before they could even figure out what to do next, the villain was blindsided by a punch to the right side of his face by Kirishima. When the villain let go of Kaminari, he was shot with a bullet that she recognized as belonging to Izuku. Ignoring the screams of terror coming from the downed villain, Kyuka turned around and saw Izuku looking battered and brushed. She ran to him at top speed and jumped onto him, wrapping her legs around his waist before giving him a passionate kiss. He returned it in kind before they eventually separated. When they turned, they saw Momo looking at them with embarrassment on her face, but they also caught longing in her eyes. Kyuka turned back to Izuku. "What took you so long?" Izuku chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head and explained what had happened. Izuku had no idea where the hell he was or what was happening around him. All he knew was that he was in a concrete building and it was raining outside. Normally the rain would be calming for the fear quirk user, but this rain just made him feel anxious. The pitter-patter hitting against the window sounding like fingers tapping against the glass, trying to draw his attention away from the real threat. He looked around as he heard footsteps coming towards him, so he ran and ducked behind cover. Moments later, he saw 2 villains dragging an unconscious Kirishima behind them. "URG, where is the other brat?" One of them, who was wearing a maroon t-shirt, yelled in frustration. A slightly overweight villain that was wearing an orange hoodie sighed. He pointed at the redhead he had been dragging around. "Can we just dump the redhead here? My arm's getting sore." The other villain just waved his hand to silently signal that he didn't care. Once they were out of sight, Izuku dashed to his friend's side and tried to wake him up. Sadly, nothing he seemed to do would wake him up, so he picked his friend up and put him in a closet to keep him safe. Once Kirishima was secured, Izuku gave him a spare gas mask just in case he turned and thought of how to deal with the villains from earlier. The safest option is to hide as well, but that runs the risk of eventually being found. Izuku thought to himself, "If I fight, I can take them out and whittle down their numbers, but run the risk of being taken out or killed." Neither option sounded appealing to the greenette, but then he thought about how Kyuka was probably fighting for her life and probably trying to get to him. He also thought about Arie crying over his and his girlfriend's coffin while being comforted by his mother's and Kyuka's parents. He thought about his options for a moment before making his decision. "Bucket," he said as he put on his mask and took out a fear gas grenade. Izuku managed to find them again as they were standing there bored out of their minds. The one that had complained about not finding any other students bumped the orange guy's shoulder. "Hey." "Yeah? Do you ever wonder why we're here?" The one in orange sighed and was about to potentially give this grand speech about life when Izuku interrupted by throwing something to make a clanging noise. They both whirled around to see what had made that noise, but were only met with the emptiness of the hallway. This was just a distraction he needed to get to the power box and cut the power to the building, drenching it in complete darkness. He didn't need to let his eyes adjust for long as the windows allowed some light to seep into the building. Izuku looked at the 2 villains and grinned as he saw them almost shaking in their boots. Like a predator, he decided to play with his prey just a little bit. He raised his gun at the 2 and fired 2 fear bullets that stuck into their necks. He watched as their pupils dilated and chose this moment to sing a little. London Bridge is falling down, London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Izuku sang slowly and in a low tone as he advanced on his targets, while his voice echoed in the empty space around them. He didn't know why he liked to sing these nursery rhymes when experimenting with his quirk, or when using it in combat, but he wasn't going to complain. Build it up with iron bars, build it up with iron bars, my fair lady. Right when he was behind them, he grabbed the maroon one by his head and slammed it into the nearby wall to knock him out. The orange one instinctively ducked out of the way and shot flames at Izuku while screaming for his life. He ducked under the flames and delivered a punch to the man's balls. He screamed in pain before Izuku knocked him out with a punch to the jaw. Just when he thought things might get easier, he heard 3 more voices call out from below him. Come on, you maggots! I just heard the distinct sounds of girly screaming coming from above. Pinky, you're coming with me? I would say it's more of a lightish red, but I'm more than happy to give you a handy. Why am I surrounded by idiots? He sighed to himself. I wonder if Kyuka has it any easier? Kyuka shook her head as Izuku finished his story. Sounds like a bunch of dumbasses. Oh, trust me, they were, Izuku said with a chuckle. When Kirishima eventually woke back up, we made our way outside, where we met 3 more people with different shades of blue shirts. The one in the deeper blue was nice. He was a little confused, but he had the spirit, Kirishima said as he threw Kaminari over his shoulder. We should get back to the entrance as soon as we can. The longer we stay here, the higher the chance other villains will come here. The Ravionet looked over the cliff edge and watched Aizawa fighting off some of the villains. Izuku and Kyuka saw this and walked over while putting a hand on her shoulders. He'll be fine, Izuku said, though there was worry in his voice. He's tougher than he looks. Momo smiled as they reassured her that their teacher will be fine. They turned around to walk to Kirishima and Kaminari when the dirt and rock underneath them started to give way, sending the trio tumbling down near the central plaza. With a groan, they sat up and made sure they were all right, though Izuku did curse under his breath about how the Midoriya luck was acting up. This has got to be the worst day of my life, Kyuka groaned. Worse than when Arie drank my coffee that had my regular 8 shots of espresso boosts? Izuku asked with a raised eyebrow. The purplet thought for a moment before she shuddered as she reminded the caffeinated whirlwind that was Arie. This is the second worst day of my life. They turned their attention to the plaza and watched their teacher take on a literal horde of villains all by himself. After he took them all out, the villain covered in hands started to slow clap. You really are cool, Eraserhead, but I got you figured out, stated the villain in a raspy, dark tone of voice. While you cover your eyes with those goggles to prevent anyone from seeing where you are looking, your hair floats up when your quirk is activated. That's your tell, and seeing it raise up and down so often is when you're blinking. Possibly due to keeping your eyes nice and moist. Aizawa grunted as he internally scolded himself to let such a thing be noticed, holding the arms of the villain tighter, as the beady red eyes staring at the underground hero looked gleeful. Before Aizawa could retort to the villain's claims, he shouted in pure agony as he felt incredible pain coming from his right elbow. He pushed the villain back and away from him, turning his attention to his elbow and grunting in annoyance now more than pain, seeing part of his shirt totally missing along with what looked like his skin and exposing his bare muscle to the air. Hee, the villain chuckled lowly, shrugging his shoulders and now standing more relaxed. To think I was able to get a hit on the Eraserhead. Well, as you may have guessed, it was me who took down your pathetic little security grid, what with my quirk and all. He raised his hand up, wiggling his fingers. Anything I touch with all of my fingers turns to dust, disintegrated to nothing. You wouldn't believe how many controllers I destroyed by gripping them too hard. And what? That's how you'll kill Almight? You wouldn't be quick enough to touch him before he smashes your face in. Aizawa shouted loudly. From behind his goggles, his eyes had spotted the trio when they fell and internally cursed at the situation. The teacher's attention was brought back to the manchild before him, however, when the villain bellowed a sickly laugh. What? Do you think I'm the final boss of this encounter? No, that's reserved for him, Nomu. As the name was called out, a large shadow encompassed Aizawa, who looked behind to see the large ebony being with an exposed brain staring him down. Break him. The thing called Nomu brought its massive fist down on Eraserhead's head and repeatedly smashed it into the ground, With each hit, blood flew everywhere while the hand villain laughed like an unhinged maniac. Momo, Kyuka and Izuku were frozen in fear by the sight in front of them. Before anything could happen, Kurogiri warped next to the cackling man. "I'm sorry, Tamura Shigaraki, but one of the hero's students managed to escape. If you weren't alright out of here, Kurogiri, I'd kill you." The now named Tamura Shigaraki sneered. "It's clear the boss isn't going to show, let's just get out of here." The trio let out a sigh of relief knowing that the villains would be leaving. That peace of mind was quickly dashed when they heard Shigaraki speak again. "But not before we break his spirit." Faster than anyone could react, he lunged at the trio with his hand outstretched and aimed straight towards Kyuka's face. She watched with growing horror as the deranged villain charged at her as time seemed to slow down around her. She saw her life up to this point flash by her like a choppy slideshow. She saw all the times she cried and her parents cheering her up, the times she met the love of her life Izuku and her daughter Arie, the birthdays and Christmases they spent together. She witnessed all the what-ifs of the future where they accept Momo into their relationship and saw their wedding, their honeymoon, their children, all things that she will never get to experience, and only a single thought entered her mind: "I'm sorry, Arie, mommy's not coming home today." Then she saw movement from the corner of her eye and saw Izuku leap in front of her with his back facing the villain, and his arms wrapped around her in a tight hold. As her vision started speeding up, Kyuka panicked. "No, Izuku, get out of the way. Don't do this." When the Shigaraki's hand touched Izuku back, the greenette tensed, waiting for his disintegration, but nothing happened. They looked back and saw Eraserhead's glowing red eyes glaring daggers at the villain, with Shigaraki grinning. "You really are cool, Eraserhead." When the Nomu slammed Aizawa's head again, they heard something being primed come from the direction of Momo before a loud sound ripped through the USJ. Bang! Chapter 17. Bang! The sound of a gun being fired echoed across the USJ, with those near it as silent as a grave. While they looked at the source, Momo Yaoyorozu stood there with the smoking barrel of a Smith & Wesson Model 500 revolver pointed straight at Shigaraki's head. Fortunately for the decaying villain, his pet Nomu dropped the battered pro-hero to take the bullet for him. Unfortunately for the abomination, said round blew a chunk of its head off, but not enough to kill it, which was good, as it would have killed its master. Izuku and Kyuka looked at the Ravenette with shocked expressions, as they did not expect her to do that, nor were they expecting the scowl she wore that really did not belong on her face. "Get away from my friends!" she screamed as she shot the Nomu again, blowing another chunk off its face with its right eye. This provided a perfect distraction for Kyuka to send her jacks to her boots and blast the villain with a sonic blast. Shigaraki went flying from the attack, making his monster to run after him to catch him. He held his hands over his bleeding ears as he tried to reorient himself. Izuku, Momo and Kyuka stood from their spot, with the couple looking at Momo. "Since when do you use guns?" Izuku asked. "Mother and father have taken me to the shooting range ever since I was a little girl," Momo said. "It was also how they released their stress from dealing with other snobbish high-class families." Izuku nodded as his attention went back to the Nomu. Where Momo had blown off its eye, he saw it regenerating the parts and bullet holes it had sustained. "I think that thing has regeneration." "Good, that means I don't need to use this," the Yaoyorozu heiress said with a polite smile as she made sure the pistol could not be used again before throwing it away, and started creating something new from her stomach. After a moment, a full minigun was produced with the ammo belt connected to her. "It also means I can alleviate some of my own stress." Shigaraki growled at the three of them and barked the order for Nomu to kill them, though it was slowed down due to it being riddled with bullets by Momo. While the monster was distracted, Izuku and Kyuka went to deal with Shigaraki and Kurogiri. The purplet fired another sonic blast at the purple mist villain to disorientate him, while the greenette ducked and weaved between Shigaraki's attempts to grab him. "Stay still, brat!" Shigaraki yelled as Izuku ducked under another swipe before delivering an uppercut to his chin. The villain staggered back from the blow, but not before grabbing Izuku's mask and decaying it to dust. Now without his mask, Izuku swept the legs from under Shigaraki and kicked him in the face. "Arie designed that mask, asshole!" The greenette jumped back when the villain tried to grab his leg, but this gave Shigaraki enough time to stand back up. With a final dash from Izuku, he extended his hand and plunged his needle glove into the villain's chest, causing the fear toxin inside to be injected into the light blue-haired villain. Immediately the effects of the token took hold and showed Shigaraki everything that he feared, including the stuff that he represented. He started hyperventilating as his eyes started dilating before looking at Izuku and lunged to kill the greenette, as saw his father standing in his place. Before he could even touch the greenette, the decaying villain was wrapped up in a very long tongue and flung into the air. Indiscriminate shock! 1.3 million volt discharge! Another voice yelled with a bolt of electricity zapping the poor villain. Izuku looked over to where he heard the voice and saw Tsuyu, Mineta and Kaminari had just landed near the shoreline, though the little pervert wasn't moving. "How'd you guys deal with the villains?" Izuku asked before looking at Mineta. "He dead?" "Kaminari electrocuted the water ribbit," Tsuyu said before her fellow greenette could ask. She continued, "And no, he's unconscious, he grabbed my breast." Izuku nodded in understanding. He looked over to Kyuka's location and watched as Kurojiri was on his knees while clutching his ears as she kept blasted him with sound. Looking to Momo, she kept up the assault with the minigun she created and kept Nomu at bay. When Shigaraki was tossed into the air and electrified, the Nomu's eyes shifted to where its master had fallen and let out an ear-piercing screech. It rushed past everyone and caught its master before setting him down. It turned to look at the three and leapt forwards with its arm cocked back. With blinding speed it reached them and punched Izuku, causing him to be sent flying towards the fountain nearby and smash right into it. "Izuku!" Kyuka and Momo cried out as the boy slumped over. With rage, Kyuka amped up the power of her quirk, determined to turn Kurojiri's insides to liquid. Momo rushed to the downed boy and applied first aid with her quirk, while Tsuyu and Kaminari fought with the Noma. Momo reached the greenette and got to work checking his injuries, with the most notable being the bleeding head wound. She heard a noise coming from where the others were and saw that Nomu was currently being thrashed around by vines that spouted out of the ground. It didn't take a rocket scientist to know that Ibra had arrived on the scene and causing havoc to the abomination. She also caught sight of Tokoemi rushing towards her, with Dark Shadow picking Izuku up to transport him up the stairs. "And no," Izuku mumbled weakly, looking a little dazed due to a possible concussion. "Kyuka help. I'll assist Jiru Kayama," Momo said, her tone leaving little room for argument as she turned her gaze to her avian-headed classmate. "Keep him safe." Tokoemi and Dark Shadow nodded and were about to leave, then a loud bang rang from the top of the stairs. Soon the doors were blown off their hinges, with a lone figure standing at the top that struck fear into most of the villains' hearts. All Might's mighty form stood alone without his usual trademark smile. Instead, a deep scowl was painted on his face that shook the villains that gazed upon it. "Have no fear, students!" All Might bellowed, his voice carrying across the USJ. "For I am here!" All Might gazed upon the situation before him and blitzed past some of the villains to get to the students and Aizawa. He looked upon Izuku's and Aizawa's injuries and requested that the students take them to the entrance. With a nod from everyone, they took the injured parties up the stairs. All Might," Izuku croaked, gaining the hero's attention. "It has our regeneration." "Thank you for the information, young Kayama. Just rest for now and let me handle them," All Might said as he walked towards Nomu, who had been released from Ibra's vines. "What's this? You're coming closer instead of running away?" Kurojiri slosked with intrigue as he tended to his young master, who was still under the effects of Izuku's fear toxin. "I can't kick its ass without getting closer." "Then by all means, get as close as you like," the Mistman said as he gave his order to the abomination they brought. "Nomu, kill All Might!" With a roar, the monster leapt towards All Might in a single bound, with its fists reeled back, with the hero coping the action. Their fists met, creating a shockwave from the mere force of the impact. The ground shook each time their fists connected, with cracks forming underneath them, neither of them showing any signs of backing down from their onslaught of punches. The hero caught on that the Nomu was not affected by his punches and deducted that it might have shock absorption on top of its strength. Though he was currently burning through his time limit, and the remains of his power, he poured enough strength to hit the creature in specific points to do the most amount of damage. The hero disengaged from the punching contest and jumped back for just a moment before leaping forward once again. "Carolina," All Might called a sword towards the creature once again, arms crossed in front of him. "Smash!" Nomu blocked the twin slash of All Might's arms with just his torso by simply standing there and taking the hit. Great splashes of water burst into the air from where the force of the wind pressure All Might had unleashed disturbed the lake. The hero's grin faded in confusion as he straightened his body, seeing that his attack had no effect on the villain in front of him. All Might leaned back to avoid a brutal bear hug from the Nomu. Guess young Kuyama wasn't wrong when he said it had no effect on you. The hero grunted, throwing a punch straight into Nomu's abdomen. The beast quivered at the moment of impact, but steadied and tried to slam its hands down on All Might. I recommend to cease your attempt to harm Nomu. All Might. Our master has gifted him the ability of shock absorption, Kurogiri said calmly as the two titans duked it out, with All Might mostly keeping up an offensive that dealt no damage. All Might laughed as he ducked under a swiftly moving hand that had attempted to grab his face. Thanks for telling me how to beat him. All Might tensed his legs and shot forward like a howitzer, Nomu rushing to meet him. Their fists impacted, a flash of light and a blast of air shooting out from the contact, and a shockwave ripped through the air and rippled through Nomu's arm. Everyone but the two combatants was blasted back and away from the battle. Weren't you listening? Kurogiri grunted as he righted himself in the air and landed on his feet. One of his powers is shock absorption. All Might smiled mockingly at him. Yeah? What about it? Grunting with effort, All Might fired another solid punch at Nomu, striking the villain in the arm that he used to block. All Might and Nomu exchanged another 2 blows before they each kicked it into high gear, throwing punches at each other so quickly that their arms were just blurs of speed and power. The concrete cracked beneath All Might's feet as he and Nomu continued to trade blows. He said your quirk was only shock absorption, not nullification. That means there's a limit to what you can take, right? A real hero, All Might pronounced as he and Nomu battled both on the ground and in the air, their fierce strength tearing apart the facility around them. We'll always find a way for justice to be served. Nomu's body bounced up from the impact, All Might landing in front of him. Now for a lesson, the pro-hero declared, standing straight with steam coming off his back. You may have heard these words before, but I'll teach you what they really mean. He reeled his fist back and prepared for his attack. Go beyond! Plus Yotaraa! All Might's punch rocketed forward straight into Nomu faster than the human eye could track, hurling Nomu into the sky and through the ceiling, explosions tearing the lights asunder and shaking the entire facility. Nomu kept going after crashing through the glass ceiling, higher and higher, breaking through clouds until he winked out of sight. Steam came off of All Might's neck. He stood amidst a cloud of dust and debris formed from his last punch and faced Shigaraki and Kurogiri. You've been bested, villains. Surrender. We all want to get this over with quickly. With Shigaraki out of commission and their bioweapon gone left the Warp Gate villain with little choice, he looked to the pro-hero that had steam rolling off of him. Till we meet again, symbol of peace. With that said, the two villains teleported away. It marked the end of the USJ invasion with the heroes victorious. Soon after, the other heroes entered the facility with Midnight practically shoving her way through, and when she saw both her wife on the ground and her battered son being carried, she rushed over screaming, Haruki! Izuku! Mom? Izuku stuttered out, still dazed and completely unaware or caring for the looks of shock from his fellow classmates. He turned his head to look at his other mother. Mama, is she? Nemuri hugged him and her wife tight as tears formed in her eyes as paramedics came rushing in to take Eraserhead, 13 and Izuku to hospital to be treated. Hours later, Izuku's eyes fluttered open before he quickly shut them again due to the burning sensation that hit his eyes. After blinking them away, he was treated to the sight of a completely white ceiling and sterile walls. He looked to his right and saw Haruki wrapped in bandages looking like a mummy, the steady beeping of a heart monitor finally registering in his mind and letting him know where he was. He was in a hospital bed. Izuku felt a squirming sensation to his chest, but when he looked to see what it was, he was met with a sea of white hair. He smiled at his daughter and softly petted her head, making her look up at him with puffy eyes indicating she was crying. He felt his heart ache at the sight, especially since he was evidently the reason she was crying. So with a reassuring smile he pulled Arie closer to him, where she almost snapped his neck with how tight she hugged him. Papa! She yelled, remembering not to yell at a hospital. She cried more into his shoulder with her father smoothly rubbing circles on her back. The doors opened, causing the two awake room occupants to look, and saw Kyuka, Namuri, and a nurse stepping into the room. Immediately after that, both his girlfriend and mother came rushing to him, crushing him and Arie in a hug. He vaguely registered the nurse scolding the two women, but it was drowned out by the sobs of his loved ones. After composing themselves and untangling themselves, the nurse told the boy that he was unconscious for a few days, and the extent of his injuries. Broken bones, some internal bleeding, an almost broken spine, cracked skull, and a concussion. She listened off. Recovery girl came by to heal a lot of your injuries along with 13 and Eraserhead. Honestly, you're lucky that you're not in a coma or dead, let alone you still being able to walk. While you are fit to leave after we do a few tests, we recommend that you get bed rest and not exerting yourself for a few days. The nurse continued. She caught Izuku's eyes looking at Haruki and spoke softly. Your mother is fine, just some lacerations to her back and a few skin grafts. She'll make a full recovery. The greenette let out a breath he didn't know he was holding and visibly relaxed at the information. With that, the nurse left the family to have their moment, while she went to find a doctor. After getting checked out and a temporary wheelchair assigned to them, they transported Izuku back to his home and into bed. It was a struggle to get him up the stairs, but they managed. What followed was his daughter, girlfriend, and mother fussing over him to make sure he was all right. He hated it with every fiber of his being and wanted nothing more than to just get up and do things. Sadly for him, Namuri and Kyuka put Arie on guard duty to make sure he never got out of bed. They even gave her a ridiculously large squeaky hammer that was twice the size of her to hit him with. Not to mention a Nerf gun with a duffel bag filled with darts to shoot him with if he snuck off. If Izuku wasn't annoyed that he kept getting caught, he'd find it amazing that she could keep nailing him in the back of his head. Eventually he did get better, and was able to work in the cafe as long as he didn't exert himself. He found out that Yui would be closed until they could upgrade the security system and launch an investigation. This gave the students time to relax and heal any potential injuries that they may have sustained during the attack. Even in his current state, where he constantly insisted that he was fine, he had to begrudgingly thank for. Kyuka was standing in his kitchen making some food for them when she heard the sound of the doorbell being rung. After making sure that nothing would burn, she made her way to the door and opened it to reveal Momo. Yaoyorozu? What are you doing here? Kyuka asked, confused as to why she would be here. The young heiress blushed while producing a bag of tea blends and sheepishly smiled. I wanted to check on you and Kuyama. Oh, then come on in, Kyuka said as she stepped to the side, letting the ravenette to pass and lead her to the bedroom. He's just in his room. As they approached the door, they heard yelling from the other side. They pressed their ears to the door to listen in, with Kyuka having a cheeky smirk. Arie, for the last time, I'm fine. No! The sound of something made of hollow plastic hitting something and Izuku's cry of pain was heard. Get in bed! Arie! Stop hitting me with that thing! Get in bed! The sound of another bonk came through. Or I tell Mama to not make Katsudon. You wouldn't, dear. They heard Izuku growl. Try me, Papa. There was silence for a moment before they heard the sound of something flopping onto the bead. It was then that the two women entered, making their presence known. Kyuka looked on with a smirk as she saw him back in bed with her daughter sitting on the foot of the bed with her mallet glaring daggers at each other. Momo was failing to keep her laughter at bay, resulting in her releasing snorts of laughter. Izuku looked at their guest and smiled. Hey Yaoyorozu! What brings you to our lovely home? I just wanted to check in on how you were doing, she said after collecting herself. She set the bag of tea down onto the nightstand. Though, it seems that you're not following instructions from your caretaker. The greenette groaned while his daughter giggled at his apparent misery. I'm not allowed to leave the bed unless I need the bathroom or until I'm back to 100%. Momo giggled with the two other females in the room. She felt very relaxed around the two of them, and it warmed her heart knowing that Izuku would be okay. Since the USJ invasion, she was, as her mother called her, a complete worrywart over the two that she grew fond of. Well, if you maybe didn't try to act like you aren't injured, then we wouldn't have to do this, Aizu. Kyuka sighed in frustration. Honesty, you can be such an idiot sometimes. Oh, don't you start. Izuku bit back. All I'm saying is put me in a chair and sit me at the cash register. And you'll still get up to work. Momo sat in comfortable silence as she listened to the two young parents started to bicker like an old married couple over him not being able to work. The Ravenet smiled at this as despite their argument there was no real heat to their arguing and held nothing but love for each other. Arie crawled past her parents and climbed into Momo's lap and immediately hugged her. Momo reciprocated the hug and started to braid the young child's hair. "Papa should stop before Mama puts him in the doghouse," Arie said quietly to Momo as she watched her parents argue. The Ravionette giggled as she continued her action while watching the live-action drama. In her head she thought that she could get used to this. Chapter 18. It was a week later that anyone got informed that Yuri would be reopening in 3 days' time, so suffice to say a lot of people were either excited about getting back to class or groaning about how their time off was cut short. For those in Class 1A it meant that they could all truly see that everyone was alright, and could take comfort in being around the people who went through the same thing. Izuku was fully healed by the time they got the news, and Arie was practically hopping around eagerly to see her aunts and uncles again. But there were some things that needed to be taken care of first. Ever since the USJ, Izuku had been having the same nightmares that often led him to stay awake throughout the entire night. Sometimes Kyuka was there with him during the nights and had helped him go back to sleep. Sadly, she couldn't be there all the time and would be back home with her parents. The cafe was closed and nobody was inside apart from Nemuri, who was sitting by one of the tables with Arie, who was playing with some of her toys. After putting on his coat, his mother got up and gave him a hug. "I'm still confused as to why you want to go to him, Izuku," she said after releasing him from the hug. "You know Hound Dog is a licensed therapist, right?" "I know, Mom, it's just I've known him a lot longer than I have Hound Dog," Izuku admitted. "I trust him." Nemuri sighed with a smile and ruffled her son's hair. "All right, I'll watch Arie while you go to your friend." Giving him a kiss on the forehead and him saying his goodbyes to his daughter, Izuku walked out and drove to his destination. It wasn't a long drive per se, but it did make it easier to avoid people badgering him with questions he'd rather not answer. After the short drive, he arrived at a large apartment building that he was all too familiar with. With some hesitation, he amended the stairs and found the door that he was looking for. Izuku knocked on the wooden door while staring off at the way he walked from. He contemplated whether or not he should do what crossed his mind before being ripped from the thought when the door opened, revealing Jonathan Crane. "Mr. Midoriya, Mr. Kiyama, please come in and make yourself at home," he said with a smile while letting the boy enter. He closed the door when Izuku stepped inside. "Did you find the place all right?" "I used to live here," Izuku revealed, sadness evident in his voice. 3 floors up from here is where lived with my mom when she was alive." "Sorry, Izuku, had I know you used to live here I..." "Don't be, honestly, being back here is helping a bit, brings back good memories." Jonathan said nothing but nodded as he led Izuku further into his home. It was quite bland, barring a few pictures of his family, and some oddities that the therapist found interesting. When Izuku was seated on the couch, Jonathan went to the kitchen while asking if the greenette wanted anything to drink, to which he requested tea, and after brewing a coffee for himself and Izuku's tea, he handed them over. "I don't get something," the green-haired boy eventually said as he sat there for a moment just looking at the cup in his hands. "Tea was invented in China, right? But why is Britain the one known for tea?" The therapist paused for a moment as he thought about the boy's question before suggesting, as he did not know the answer. "Maybe it's because of the amount that they imported or something? You'd have to ask Nezu about the leaf water that he likes. He'd probably also give a lecture about the bean water that you're drinking right now," Izuku said before taking a drink. "Before or after he hunts you down for that comment, I don't know. I'd probably have to leave the planet," Jonathan said with a chuckle, though there was a bead of sweat that rolled off of his head. "There would be no place for me to hide if he went after me." There was a comfortable silence that blanketed the room, with the only interruption being the ticking of the cat-shaped wall clock. After finishing his coffee, Jonathan looked at Izuku with his demeanor becoming more professional. "I'm guessing you want to talk about the USJ, right?" "You guess?" Izuku sighed as he set his teacup down. "It's all over the news and you were at the epicenter if I'm not mistaken," Dr. Crane said while crossing his right leg over his left. "Would you like to talk about it?" Izuku hesitated for a moment as he contemplated on whether or not he should respond. He had always just kept things to himself as to not put stress on anyone around him, and when he got Arie, he pushed his personal problems down for her sake. Now he has people who want what's best for him and learned that his daughter wasn't as oblivious to his problems as he internally thought. With a sigh, he chose his answer. I almost died that day. Jonathan sat there in silence and gestured for the young father to continue. We all almost died that day, me, Kyuka, Mom, all of our friends. That day could have been our last day and none of us were prepared. I was lucky that I wasn't comatose or dead after what happened, and so is Mom, but it was so. His hands were shaking and he was sure that the fellow Fear Quirk user could hear his heart thumping in his chest. Izuku took a deep breath before he continued. I keep having the same nightmare where Kyuka and Yaoyorozu were turned to dust by that villain. I keep dreaming that Arie was allowed to go with us, and she was killed by those bastards or worse. Yaoyorozu? Dr. Crane asked, the first time he spoke during Izuku's rambling. She's our friend that we made during school, Izuku repealed. The therapist nodded his head before asking another question. And where was Arie during this time? She was back at Yui with Mom and Nezu, though I don't really know what she did during that time, Izuku said. All I got from her was some giggles and that was it. Nemuri was walking to the cafeteria while scratching her head in confusion, worry clearly written all over her face. She looked over and saw Lunch rush in the kitchen as he just put a fresh bowl of apples on the kitchen island. He turned to continue cooking when he spotted her approaching. Midnight? Are you all right? You look worried about something. I'm fine, Lunch rush, but I'm looking for Arie, she said while her eyes scanned the rest of the cafeteria. I left her alone with Nezu for a moment so I could work on something, but when I went back they were gone. Lunch rush hummed in though as he scratched the part of his helmet where his chin should be. If Nezu's with her then I wouldn't worry too much, he won't let anyone or anything hurt her on his watch. I know, but she is my granddaughter and I'm worried where she might have gotten to, she moaned before running her hand through her hair. Izuku and Kyuka would kill me if I lost her. Speaking of which, if you see your son I'd like to talk to him about recipes and such. The two pro-heroes continued to talk completely unaware of an overhead vent grate opening up and a small suction cup device descended to the apple bowl. It latched onto two of the fruits and quickly retracted back from whence it came from. Inside the vent sat Arie still in her hero costume with an apple in hand while handing the other to her partner in crime Nezu. They bit into their stolen treasure with Nezu patting the young girl on the head. We'll make a fine hero out of you yet, my little mouse, he said before descending into his laughter, while Arie giggled alongside. Every hero and student in the building collectively felt ice run through their veins and a shudder run up their spines. On second thought, I don't think I want to know, Izuku said after finishing his sentence. Probably a wise decision, Izuku, Dr. Crane said with an uneasy feeling in his stomach. He knew Izuku felt it too, but both would push that through for later. What are you going to do now, though? Huh? I mean, what are you going to do with what you're feeling? Jonathan explained. You just got a taste of what you might be expecting out in the field when you eventually go pro. Not only that, but you were figuratively caught with your pants down in what should be a safe environment. What Jonathan would say next would shock Izuku to his core, and he knew that. But he had to make sure that the boy knew that the option was available. I'm not here to dictate your life, but being ambushed by villains, coupled with the fact of the traumatic experience of almost dying. I don't think anyone would blame you if you wished to left the hero course. Indeed, Izuku was shocked as the words rattled in his head. What the American said was true, as he doubted that his mother's, Arie, Kyuka or her parents would really blame him if he left. He had a stable job running the cafe and could still go to UA through general education or the business course, but the whole thing just sounded wrong. Being a hero had always been his dream, but his mind kept putting images of him and Kyuka dying or Arie being there and being torn apart by Nomu. He could quit and keep his daughter safe, but that just didn't feel right. It didn't sound like him. Then an image flashed in his head that made his heart feel like it dropped into his stomach. He couldn't let that image happen, he wouldn't, so it didn't take long for him to make his decision. With a determined fire in his eyes, he looked at Jonathan. I'm not giving up. While you're right and that nobody would blame me, that wouldn't stop me from blaming myself for crushing another's dream. Dr. Crane looked at him in confusion, but before he could speak, Izuku cut him off by answering his unasked question. If I give up now, then I can almost guarantee that Arie would as well, That if I showed that this defeated me and made me quiet, then she'd give up on her dream of being a rescue hero. The image he saw was of his precious daughter giving up on her dream and choosing to live a life of fear, hiding away from the world and being scared of the world around her. He was like Inko in many ways, kind, gentle, terrifying when angered, but the one thing he got above all was her mule-like stubbornness. He wouldn't give up on his dreams so easily. He looked at Jonathan and saw the smile that was brought to his face. It seemed that he liked his answer. 3 days later saw Yui reopening with classes starting the day after and students re-entering their dorms to unpack. Momo had just finished putting her clothes back into their drawers when she headed to the kitchen. After descending the stairs, she looked towards the common room with confusion. It had been deathly quiet when she first entered, as everyone just wanting to be near each other, with Kaminari was sitting next to Ibra with the both of them listening to some music on his phone through shared headphones. Tsuyu sat at the table with Tokoemi, with their slight shaking signaling how they felt. Siro was texting someone with Kirishima using a hand grip strengthener, and Ochako was comforting a shell-shocked Mina. Now, however, everyone was clutching their hearts while lying on the floor near the kitchen. Walking closer, she saw Arie cleaning a bowl and covered in what looked like flour and chocolate. "What on earth happened here?" Momo questioned as she looked at the scene in front of her. "Sato was helping Arie make cookies for everyone to clear us up," Shuji revealed from his spot on the floor. "All of us got up to help her clean when she kid and licked the spoon." Just the mental image of that happening caused Momo to clutch her heart, with a tiny drop of blood escaping from her mouth. Mina's hand shot up while holding her phone. "And I've got it on video!" At the mention of her name, Arie turned to see Momo before jumping from her stool and running to the tall girl. "Momo! I would hug you, but I don't want you to be messy." The Ravionette giggled as she petted the young girl on the head. "Then let's get you cleaned up so then you can give hugs to everyone." With a nod, she led the young girl to her parents' room. She knocked on the door and waited for one of the two she loved cared for to open it. A few moments later, Kyuka opened the door. With the first thing she saw was the state her daughter was in. She looked at Momo questioningly, with the taller girl explaining what had transpired downstairs. The purplet stepped to the side, allowing them into the room, where they saw Izuku at the desk writing something in a notebook. Before she could greet him, she watched as Arie walked to the wardrobe and spoke to it. "Apple!" The unicorn child waited for a moment before opening the doors and grabbed a t-shirt that was her size with the words "Apple" written on it. Momo was confused and was about to question the oddness before Kyuka spoke. "The wardrobe gives you that style of shirt if you speak to it." "It's true." Izuku spoke up now, turned around to look at the Ravionette. "I never buy those shirts, but somehow they end up there. When I bought the house above my cafe, it already had a wardrobe that dosed the same, but also had a spare, so I bought it here." Momo thought for a moment and looked at every shirt they had in there before giving it a try. "Cretin." Waiting a few moments, she opened the doors and grabbed a plain red t-shirt with the words Cretin written on it. "Told you," Kyuka said with a smirk as she watched the Ravionette's mind being blown. "Why don't you go try it on?" Momo waited for Arie to come out of her room before heading inside to change into the shirt. She took a moment to look at the girl's room and was amazed at the amount of rescue hero memorabilia the child had. One thing did catch her eye. Sitting on a shelf next to both a 13 and younger recovery girl statue was a cute clay model of what looked like Izuku. "I made that," a voice called from behind her. Turning around, she saw Arie standing there looking at where the rich girl was looking. "When Pap told me what heroes were and about rescue heroes, I wanted to have him there." "Why?" Momo asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because Papa is my hero," Arie said with a smile that could easily be considered that of a son. It melted the Ravionette's heart, and would possibly make her go blind if she looked for too long. That's when she got an idea, so with some concentration she activated her quirk and a small action figure came out of her shoulder. Arie grabbed it, and was shocked to find that it was an exact replica of Izuku in his hero costume, just without the sack over his head. Then a second figure came out, and it was of Kyuka in her hero costume. The young girl held them close to her heart before giving Momo a tight hug while looking at her with starry eyes. "Thank you, Momo." "It's no problem, Arie." Momo giggled before putting the t-shirt on and was surprised by comfortable and that it fit her quite well. After a moment, the two girls made their way out of the little girl's room. "Momo?" Arie said while tugging the older girl's hand slightly. "Do you think you could make me everyone from the class?" I'm sure that could be arranged, dear. She smiled at the unicorn child. Once out of the room, she saw Izuku and Kyuka looking at her with blushes on their faces. She'd question that later. Arie made cookies with Sato. Wanna come? Sure. The greenette stood and walked towards the door. Beats the annoyance that is Bill's. That I think you and my father could agree on, Kiyama, Momo said with a smile as they all left together, but not before she noticed something on the bottom of the wardrobe that caught her attention. She looked closely and saw the name that she could only guess was the manufacturer. Who the heck is Dr. Wondertainment? She thought, never having heard of them before. Chapter 19. 1. Rise of the Beasts trailer lets bucking Gyoul. 2. Watch the Vigilante arc, and can this show stop making me cry for 5 minutes? 3. Get blinded, idiots. Aizawa was a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will, something that most knew very little about. But as he approached the door that led into his boss's room, he started questioning if he should just turn back now and make a run for it. Steeling his nerves, he knocked on the door with his foot. Due to his entire upper body being wrapped up in bandages, he received no answer but made the decision to enter anyway. What do you mean you lost an entire state? Was the first thing he heard from Nezu, the school's principal, currently looking at his computer with his paws locked together. How do you lose an entire state overnight? It means exactly that, Nezu. 1 minute Florida was there and the next minute it was gone. The American president groaned on the other side of the device. We think it had something to do with the recent talks they had with Ohio, but we are unsure at this time. Nezu sighed while picking up his teacup. May I ask why you decided to ask me for help, Mr. President? Let's be honest here, Nezu. If anyone can reverse this, it's you. The principal thought for a moment, mulling over his options, when the president reluctantly continued. If you do this for me, I'll owe you a favor. Are you sure that's why, sir? A male voice quietly gasped from the other side, horror clear as day in their voice. I mean, it's just Florida. For the sake of things, yes. The American sighed while looking at the rodent's massive grin. Do we have a deal, Nezu? Most certainly we do. I'll have it back in a moment, Nezu said with a smile that sent shivers down everyone's spines as he moved the mouse to the end call button. Until we speak again, President Walt Disney Pepsi Comcast. After ending the call was when Nezu acknowledged Aizawa's mummified presence, which brought a frown to the principal's usually grinning face when his eyes looked at the bandages. Aizawa, how are you feeling? I'm doing fine, sir. Just came to inform you that Nomuri has told my bunch of brats that Hound Dog's office is open for them if need. The mummified Aizawa said as he sat down on the couch in the office. Though she has told me that her son and his girlfriend have been seeing a separate therapist, someone named Jonathan Crane. I see. Thank you for informing me, Aizawa, the Chimera said with his smile gradually returning. How are you holding up? I understand your partner was quite distressed. Hisashi damn near flooding the hospital with his tears. The doctors said that they haven't had a flood like that since some green-haired woman worked there. Eraserhead sighed. Though Nezu couldn't see it, he could tell there was a fond smile on the hero's face. I love him with all my heart, but he needs to learn to control himself in public, especially when out of costume. Nezu smiled as he listened to how his employee talked about his husband. He might have a sadistic love for tormenting humanity for what some of them did to him, but he loved seeing their softer sides more. That remains me, Aizawa said abruptly, looking at his boss with a worried expression. The class has been getting a lot of attention from the press due to them reporting the incident and their involvement. I fear what some of the other students might try to do something illogical. Yes, I thought the same thing, so I asked the staff to explain to the students that Class 1A had been through a traumatic experience and that hostility will not be tolerated. Nezu explained as he opened a drawer and withdrew an old-looking book from it. The book gave the teacher an uneasy feeling in his gut. If they do, then they will experience punishment. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to get Florida back. Aizawa nodded and with nothing else to say left his boss to whatever nonsense he was going to do. Nezu now sat alone in his office with a cup of tea in his paws and a look of unease on his face. The old book sat there giving off both an aura that would make any normal man run for the hills, but also an aura of calm and gentle embrace. The book that lay on his desk was old and worn. The leather book cover looked to be a deep black with gold etching, but if a strong light were to be shown, it would reveal that it was actually a very deep red. Italic writings adorned the book in a language that none could understand, and a gold interwoven string came from the top. With a heavy sigh, Nezu opened the book as he reminisced about the day he got it. He was in the United Kingdom on vacation when he decided to take a trip to the city of Newcastle to see what the place was like. After walking around for a bit, he entered a nearby library and found the book that he was currently looking through. It intrigued him to say the least, and took the book with him to his hotel. Nezu wasn't one for cravings, but right now he really wished he had some Jaffa cakes, as they were really nice with his tea. He was drawn out of his thoughts when he found the page he was looking for. The one thing that he learned about this book was that nobody could understand it unless there was something you wanted that the book could grant you. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and stuck his right paw out while reciting the words from the book. Morv high of obadan peed woleb. I namus woyer rof ta I keys. Nerb trof 8 snom dan slegna. Dhymllac. For a moment nothing happened, then suddenly a massive tornado of black fire erupted from the middle of his office. When they dispelled, Nezu was in shock at who was standing in his office. Emerging from the black fire looked like Izuku with quite a few differences. Instead, his hair being green, it instead was pure white. His eyes were a piercing blood red, the sclera of his eyes was black and gave the effect that his eyes were glowing, sharp pointed teeth. Black bat-like wings that faded into green, and finally were 2 horns that protruded from the front of his head and pointed upwards. So, a version of Nezu has summoned me, it seemed. The Izuku look-alike hummed while cracking his neck and looking directly at Nezu. This should be interesting. His voice was smooth, level, and deceptively calming that put the chimera even more on guard. Nezu gestured to the seat in front of him, to which the Izuku look-alike took while crossing his leg over the other. With a well-hidden shudder and inhale of air, Nezu spoke to the look-alike. I'm in need of your services, Izuku Morningstar, son of Lucy Morningstar, the Queen and CEO of Hell, at your service. Izuku revealed with a wide, sharp-toothed grin. He put his hand over his heart and gave a small bow before straightening back up. I'd speak now, Nezu. I was in the middle of something and I really hate being interrupted. Nezu silently gulped under the man's aura. It felt like it was choking him, and judging by his widening grin, he was getting exactly the response he wanted from him. Before the principal could speak, a bright golden light lit up the room. What emerged from the shining light was a woman that looked like a direct copy of Ochako Uraraka, with the only difference being that she had white dove-like wings that came from her back. She marched over to the demonic Izuku with a stern expression and smacked him upside the back of his head. Stop the tough demon act, Aizu, and see what Nezu wants. Why yes, Ochako, dear. Izuku stuttered while rubbing where he was hit before looking at Nezu again, his demeanor changing from menacing to kind in a matter of seconds while Ochako took a seat on his lap. So, you summoned me here. What do you need? After recovering from the metaphorical whiplash, the chimera responded. It has come to our attention that the state of Florida has seemingly disappeared. I was wondering if you could bring it back. Again? What the heck are they doing there? Izuku groaned as he snapped his fingers. There, back where it should be. For your price I request a bottle of vinegar. A little confused by the request, Nezu produced the requested item and was immediately disgusted when he saw the demon Izuku drink the entire bottle in one go. After finishing his beverage, Izuku looked back at his summoner. Is that all, or can we wrap things up here? There is one more thing I wish to ask. The chimera stated. This League of Villains attacked the USJ not too long ago, so I want to know who they are and how to deal with them. The angel and demon sighed and gave him sad looks. That we cannot help you with, Ochako said. Why is that? Because we can't interfere with the world's story, Izuku explained as he pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled softly. We demons and angels can interact with the worlds we are summoned to and help in certain ways, but we can't give out information about key players or future events. The only way to do so is through riddled and vague prophecies, Ochako explained further. We are physically unable to go against these rules. If we do, we could very well destroy not only your reality but others as well. The gods learned their lesson when they revived that one Izuku variant's rabbit when he was slaughtering his way through a section of hell. We're really sorry, Nezu. He wasn't happy about this information, but since there wasn't anything that could be done about it, he just sighed and waved his hand to dismiss the two lookalikes. They stood up and moved to the middle of the room before Nezu remembered something and asked, What do I owe you as payment? What about that Dr. Wondertainment closet that was transported here because of Dr. Bright messing with the product and that one poor dimension hopper? Ochaka whispered into Izuku's ear. It's not from this reality and I can sense that it's nearby. Nah, it's practical harmless and besides either Dr. Wondertainment, the Foundation or its anomalies exist in this world so it should be fine. Izuku waved off before returning to thinking about what he wanted when he finally thought of something. Do you know of a small girl named Arie? The classroom of 1A was filled with noise as everyone was talking about their time off or drawing on the chalkboard like Kaminari and Ishido. Izuku was sitting at his desk talking to his girlfriend with Arie on his lap drawing her and her parents in their hero costumes fighting crime. I'm planning on going to the support department after school for an upgrade. You wanna come? Izuku asked. Chuka shook her head. I'm going to hang out with the girls later. The greenette nodded in understanding and was about to continue when the door slid open to reveal Aizawa shuffling into the classroom. Morning, Aizawa muttered through the bandages. Aizawa-sensei, you're back too soon, the class exclaimed. So you're alright, Aizawa-sensei? Ida raised his hand. Can you really call that alright? Uraraka asked behind him, worry for her teacher clear as day on her face. My well-being doesn't matter, Aizawa answered in his usual monotone voice while making his way to the podium and rubbing the chalk drawing of Dio out, electing a cry of despair from Kaminari and Ishido, adding, more importantly, the fight is not over yet. Fight? Ibara uttered. Don't tell me, Izuku muttered nervously. The villains again? Mineta stressed. The UA Sports Festival is drawing near, Aizawa told them. That's a super normal school event, the class shouted. Is it okay to have a sports festival so soon after the villains snuck inside? Kirishima asked, unsure if this was a good decision. What if they attack us again? Arie added, cuddling up to her papa more clearly worried for both his and her mother's safety. Apparently, they think of it as UA showing that our crisis management system is solid as a rock by holding the event. Security will also be strengthened to 5 times that of previous years. Above all, our sports festival is a huge chance. It's not an event to be cancelled because of a few villains, Aizawa explained. Your time here is limited. If you expect to go pro, then this path to your future will open up at this event, Aizawa advised them. The students' faces lit up with determination as Aizawa declared. 1 chance a year, a total of just 3 chances. No aspiring heroes can afford to miss this event. If you understand that, then don't slack off on your preparations. We will also be doing a joint training exercise with your sister class 1B, their teacher announced. This will be headed by Almight and will be similar to what he taught you during your first hero exercise with him. Understood? Yes, sir. Homeroom is dismissed, Aizawa finished before rejecting humanity and returning to his sleeping bag to become an oversized caterpillar. The bell rang not long after signing lunchtime. However, before any of them could even attempt to exit, they quickly found themselves blocked in by a sea of students, each one attempting to look inside to see and view the class. Can we help you? Izuku asked, clearly confused as to what was happening. We came to see what the famous Class 1A was like, but you don't seem to be anything special, a student with purple hair and dead eyes explained, pushing his way to the front, asking, I have to say I'm not impressed. The purple-haired made it to the front, putting his hand behind his neck and continued, There are quite a few people who enrolled in general studies or other courses because they didn't make it into the hero course. Did you know that? I heard a rumor that if you win the sport festival then you'd be transferred into it, but that would also mean that someone would have to transfer people out. The purple-haired students explained about transferring students out and into the hero course, making Class 1A stiffen. Eyeing the class, the purple-haired muttered, I came to say that even if you're in the hero course, if you get carried away, I'll sweep your feet out from under you. I came with a declaration of war. Okay, hot topic, let's run a scenario here of how your hero career is probably going to go judging by your little declaration. This also goes dub-bait for the rest of you as well, Kyuka said as she leveled her eyes at everyone blocking the door and gestured for Izuku to cover Arie's ears. A major disaster happens because of a villain rampage, and there are a lot of people dead when you stumble across a scene of a little kid crying over their family's corpses. There is a lot of media coverage of this disaster due to the scale of the damage, the amount of people dead, and the heroes that are there to do damage control and rescue any survivors. She continued. What you're displaying here to villain survivors is that you'd go up to the grieving child and basically say, "You're a selfish and egotistical little shit, aren't you? You survived a villain attack that you didn't want, and now you're getting so much attention because of it, you glory hound buck. Do you even release the amount of social media backlash you'd receive for that?" A lot of the crowd at least had the decency to look ashamed as their actions were laid bare, but one, the lavender-haired boy, scowled and continued to glare at the class like they were shit that he found on his shoe. "It doesn't matter what you think, I'm getting that spot," he said before his tired eyes looked down to see Arie no longer had her ears covered and was now hiding behind her parents' legs, her eyes peeking out to look at the mob of scary people blocking them. He smirked as he now found something to truly get under their skin. "Who does this bastard child belong?" Before the lavender-haired boy could finish his sentence, Izuku's hand clenched around his throat and slammed him into the doorframe. Izuku lifted him up by his throat so that his feet were dangling off the floor and glared into his soul with an anger that would make most villains freeze. "Listen closely, boy, and you better listen well, because you do not know of the dark pit that you are staring down," Izuku growled, tightening his grip on the boy's throat while feeling him thrashing about trying to escape and get fresh air into his lungs. "You can say all the things you want about me, as I have heard it all before and worse, but if you even dare speak ill about the people I love and care for, insult my daughter in front of me again, and you'll be stuck in a never-ending nightmare from which you will never wake from. Am I clear?" Receiving no response except for the gurgling for air, Izuku leaned in closer while tightening his grip. "I said, am I clear? What the hell is going on here?" Turning his head around, he saw Haruki and Nomuri looking at him with shocked and confused faces. He let his grip on the boy loosen and let him drop to the floor. The lavender-haired boy glared at Izuku and his class before picking himself up and trudging off from wherever he came from while shoving his hands into his pockets. The green-haired boy looked around and saw that the rest of the gathered students looked at him with a tinge of fear. "Scram!" Izuku growled at the student body. The gathered student body scampered off in different directions, not wanting to anger the young father more than they already have. Izuku sighed before walking off, wanting to be alone for a bit. His mothers and daughter tried to reach out for him, but Kyuka stopped them and told them to just give him some space. Haruki nodded in understanding while Nomuri looked at students and demanded an explanation, which they were more than happy to give. During all that, however, no one noticed a pair of red eyes from a student that had stayed behind glaring at Izuku's retreating form before walking away with a TSK, a faint smell of smoke following him as left. Izuku stormed his way through the halls with a scowl on his face as he tried to calm down. He just needed to be alone for a moment to calm his mind. He didn't mean to snap like that, and he guaranteed that he made both a few enemies and made one hell of a bad impression on everyone, but he simply couldn't care less. The purple-haired boy had insulted his class and was going to insult his daughter just to get under everyone's skin. The greenette wasn't really paying attention to where he was going until an explosion occurred right next to him and caused him to fall flat on his back. When the smoke cleared, his vision was obscured by a wall of pink. "God damn it, Hatsum!" a male voice called out from the room. "What have I told you about blowing up the lab?" "Well, you know what they say. Can't make a great invention without a few explosions." The girl on top of him, Hatsum, cheered before looking at Izuku. "Hey, what are you doing down there?" "Please get off," Izuku groaned. "I don't want my girlfriend to find me here and misunderstand the situation to cause one of those dumb romance subplots where it was all a misunderstanding." "Nah, don't worry. The author won't do that to you, as he thinks it's as dumb as betrayed and cheating fics." The girl, Hatsum, waved off while jumping off of him. "What?" he questioned as he pulled himself up to his feet. "Nothing. I think that explosion might have knocked a few screws loose," Izuku muttered to himself while slightly shaking his head. Clearing his throat, he spoke to the support students. "I was coming to the support department to see about adding something to my equipment, and if I could use equipment for the sports festival." "Then you've come to the right place." Hatsum grinned as she dragged the boy into the room. "I, May Hatsum, and future owner of Hatsum Industries, will assist you." I can't tell if she's delusional or just crazy, he thought to himself. If you want to use equipment, you need a reason for it. Like for your quirk and things. She explained after reaching her desk. You also need to sign a contract saying that any accidents caused by said equipment is your fault, and that you take full responsibility. Seems reasonable enough. Izuku agreed. Now, what's your quirk and what support equipment are you currently using? He explained to Hatsum about his quirk and his current gear. The more he talked, the more he saw the pink-haired girl vibrate with excitement. That's so cool! So many babies I could create to amplify your quirk. A voice modulator, or a drone to spread the gas remotely, or... As Mei babbled on about the possibilities of working with his fear toxin, Izuku decided to walk over to the massive pile of inventions. He knew that it was the girl's pile because of the sign overhead saying to not steal her babies. His eyes gazed over the mountain of inventions and was honestly surprised at the amount that the girl had made. So many different types and varieties that she could become a one-man army if she wished. Some of the most noteworthy that he could see were a prosthetic arm that upon closer expectation had retractable blades that came from the forearm, a bike that he knew was the MK2 oppressor from GTA, a white robot that had red, orange, yellow and green circles around its boat and a white C on its chest that was tilted at a 45-degree angle, a smaller and more feminine-looking robot that had a red and white color scheme, cat-like ears and two tails that ended in electrical plugs. Finally was a blue cannon in a kind of teardrop-like shape with a yellow bar that he guessed showed the power output. Izuku was in awe at what she had created so far before something else caught his eye. Sat in the corner was what looked like a high-caliber sniper rifle with its frame colored rose red and a black trim. Picking it up, he could see that there were folding mechanisms that looked like it was meant to unfold and reshape itself. The greenette looked behind him to see Hatsum looking at the rifle with a proud smile. I see you like baby number 1823225, she said as she approached the boy holding the invention. It's designed to fire custom cartridges to suit the user's needs while allowing the user to have maneuverability and a melee option. I have to admit, it's pretty cool, Izuku admitted. You think it could take my fear bullets? Mei held her chin between her thumb and pointer finger while thinking about. I may have to change the cartridges they use, but it should be fine. Then, with your permission, I'd like to have it as part of my equipment and to use it in the sports festival. They agreed to it and signed a contract that Power Loader gave him to say that he could use it in the festival. Before leaving, however, Izuku remembered something she said. Hatsum, what did you mean by it has a melee option? Instead of answering, Mei pressed a button on the rifle and Izuku watched in awe as the weapon unlocked, unfolded, extended and relocked into its new configuration. Any more questions? She asked with a wide grin. Chapter 20. So if you divide X by Ectoplasm explained as he wrote the mathematics on the board. Some in the class listened to what the math teacher had to say while others seemed to just check out of reality. Izuku was writing in his notebook while trying not to laugh at his daughter. Despite having worked for her age, Arie tried to follow along with Ectoplasm's lesson but ultimately rested her head on the desk with smoke seeming to be coming from her head. He shook his head fondly as he concentrated on what Yue's math teacher was saying. Just after the explosion was over, the school's bell rang, signaling the start of lunch. Well, that's lunch, everyone. Remember to head straight to the locker rooms and change into your hero costumes after lunch, then head down to the train site for your lesson. Oh, before I forget, the cement hero continued while everyone started packing their things away. Kayama, Jairu and Arie, the principal has requested your presence. Izuku and Kyuka looked at each other confused before picking up their currently brain-dead daughter and taking their cases that held their hero costumes while walking towards Nezu's office. Along the way they discussed why they were called in the first place. What do you think this is about? Izuku asked, while adjusting his grip to hold Arie better. Think we might be in trouble? For what happened yesterday with you and that Gen Ed kid, maybe. For me and Arie, however, I don't know. The purple-haired girl hummed. Maybe it's something to do with Arie in today's exercise? Maybe. They approached the doors that lead into the principal's office, and just like always it made those that approach want to run the other way. Stealing their nerves, they knocked and the principal's voice called from behind them. Come in. Entering, they saw Nezu typing away on his computer before he stopped and looked at the three of them. Just the humans I wanted to see. Hi, Uncle Nezu. Arie said as she squirmed out of her father's grasp and gave the principal a hug, one he gladly returned despite the memories it brought back. Good afternoon, Nezu, sir, Kyuka said before asking a question from the last time they were in the Chimera's office. How's the whole plan on making our daughter the Queen of America going? I've decided to give up on that decision, Nezu explained with a wave of his paw as he went back to typing away on the computer. The recent escapade with Florida attacking New York alongside them and Ohio doing whatever they did yesterday to vanish from reality made me second-guess giving her that country. There are other enticing places to give her, like the United Kingdom. Since the second successful Fox bombing of Parliament, and the deaths of the royal family, it would make it easier. He explained further with his grin getting bigger. There's also Italy, maybe New Zealand, but nothing is really sticking right now. He knew he was going to regret what he was about to say. He didn't even know why he was going to say it, but Izuku turned to the principal and said, Well, when you eventually take over the world, why not make Arie your successor? Nezu paused for a moment with his paws hovering just about the keyboard before he burst into his insane laughter. Ha ha! Why didn't I think of that? I'm not going to live forever and my empire will need a new ruler when I'm gone. Brilliant, Kiyama! Brilliant! Aizu, what the buck have you done? Kyuka muttered just loud enough for Izuku to hear while the boy in question was now wishing he had Hagakure's quirk instead. Coughing into her hand to get the principal's attention again, she asked him, Why did you call us here, sir? Oh, sorry, got a little distracted there for a moment. The Chimera chuckled before his tone and demeanor changed to a more serious one. As you'll probably have thought, this has to do with your next class with 1B. I brought you 3 here to tell you about an issue that you will face with the task. What would that be, sir? Izuku asked, getting slightly nervous as to what it could be. Not what? Nezu brought a file from his desk and handed it to Kyuka. Who? Izuku, Kyuka and Arie looked at the file and their faces fell before changing into emotions Nezu expected from them. Kyuka took on a face of pure rage while Izuku looked like he was about to have a panic attack any minute. Arie's on the other hand hurt the Chimera the most as it held a look of betrayal. Why is he here? The greenette stuttered quietly. It was so quiet that Nezu almost didn't pick up on it. Why, you promise? Arie said in an equally quiet voice, turning the knife he felt in his gut even more. UA's board still wanted him in as past the documents of being a model student with no marks on his record. He did prove to be a smart and powerful student, Nezu explained remorsefully. I did make it clear to both them and his parents that he will be on a 3-strike system, forced to go to anger management therapy, and be on a very tight leash moving forward. So it's the board I have to murder, the purplet said through gritted teeth, her jacks moving like deadly snakes ready to strike at anyone who made a wrong move. Believe me when I tell you that despite my stance on second chances, I would not have let him into the hero course if I had the option, Nezu said while digging through his drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. If you like, I can write a note of absence for you. No, the principal stopped his explanation as he, Kyuka and Arie looked at Izuku, who had his head tilted down and his hair shadowing his eyes. It was going to happen eventually, might as well be on my terms. But Papa, we could leave, Arie said with a slight tremble in her voice as she hugged his leg. You don't have to face him. If I run now, I'll never stop running, sweetie. I have to do this. What makes you think you're going to face him? His girlfriend questioned. Call it paranoia, but I think that the Midoriya luck will bite me in the butt. Izuku chuckled despite his situation. I have to do this. He looked down at the files in his hand and looked at the picture attached to it. Green eyes stared at glaring red eyes. In the changing room for 1A, both in the boys and girls, there was a slight tension in the air coming from the 3 that were called. The class recognized it during lunch, and it only got worse when they were changing. When they exited, the tension only got thicker as they walked towards the observation room. When they entered, they were greeted with the sight of their sister class having a small interaction with All Might, while Eraserhead and Vlad King watched from the sidelines. Well, look what we have here. 1A filth! A blonde boy in a suit sneered before looking at the child with them in confusion. Eh? Who's this ch? Absolute cutie! The woman and some of the men from the class screamed as they all rushed to fawn over the unicorn child. Aren't you the cutest thing? A green-haired woman asked with a wide grin. What's your name? Mine Setsuna Tokage. Arie. The unicorn child stuttered, nervous around the new people. She then pointed at Izuku and Kyuka. And they're my mama and papa. The class of 1B looked at the young parents with Kyuka going on to explain the situation regarding them and Arie. The class barring one were moved by the story with a silver-haired boy clutching his heart and uttering a small manly. Kirishima looked at the silverette with a wide grin. Bro? Bro? Bro! They both yelled and gripped each other's hand while activating their similar quirks. Ah, great, there's 2 of them, everyone present thought with a sweat drop, though they did have a good chuckle at the 2's antics. Deku! A growling voice cut through the room, causing everyone to look at the speaker. There, standing in the corner with his teeth bare, was Katsuki Bakugo. What the buck do you and that curse think you're doing here, Deku? Bakugo, that's enough! Vlad King yelled at the blonde while leveling a threatening gaze at him. Remember the only reason you're even here. The blonde bomber growled before turning away with a grunt and stood in the corner, though Izuku could still feel the glaring daggers being shot at the back of his head. So that's the Bakugo bastard. Uraraka mumbled next to Izuku, with Mina shooting the blonde an equally hateful look. What's he even doing here? We'll explain later, Izuku said, with his attention being drawn to the 3 teachers that stood in front of the class. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your first joint exercise, Almight announced with his usual gusto. While your joint training would be later in the year and completely different exercise, Nezu thought it fit that we do this after the recent events at the USJ. Vlad explained. You'll be split into teams of 2, with it being 1A versus 1B. Aizawa explained further with his usual dead delivery. Heroes and villains will be chosen at random, including teams. Don't disappoint. After the teams were chosen, it was revealed that Izuku got paired with Ochako while Kyuka got Shoji. However, everyone from 1A felt bad for Momo when she got paired with Mineta and were practically forced to watch him drool over the Ravenet. Now that the teams have been chosen, let us see which side you shall be on and who will go first. All Might reached into the blind box and pulled out the teams, with Kota and Mina versus Monoma and Setsuna going first. All the teams were chosen before it got to the last that only one was really happy about. Team F, Heroes, Izuku Kuyama and Ochako Uraraka versus Team I, Villains, Katsuki Bakugo and Pony Tsunatori. Izuku had called it when he said the Midoriya luck would bite him in the ass, and this was the proof, though he could take satisfaction in knowing that his girlfriend would never doubt the existence of it ever again. They watched the matches go by, with them cheering those that won and cheering up the ones that lost. Izuku and Kyuka gave special attention to Momo when she lost her match because her partner was more distracted with her assets than he was on defending the bomb. Finally, it was Izuku's and Ochako's turn, and before they left, Katsuki jabbed a finger into the greenet's chest. You're bucking dead, you villainous Deku! You and that fat hitch! Before Izuku could even respond to that, the brunette ripped the finger from her friend's chest and bore her teeth at the blonde. Now listen here, you bucking! What followed was a string of curse words so creative and so vile it was enough to make a dead British chef's soul to nod in approval, a shiver to run down the spine of a 200-year-old villain, and curdle all the milk in Mustafa. After a full 5 minutes of letting her mouth go, she finally stopped and stormed away while dragging Izuku away with her. Kyuka was glad that she got to Arie to block her hearing. However, she noticed that a heart next to her skipped a beat and saw Mina's cheeks turning lilac while looking at the retreating form of Uraraka. The purplet grinned sadistically at her pink-skinned classmate, blackmail material. So, what plan, Bakugo? Pony asked in broken Japanese. She was getting better at it, albeit slowly. What did I say about talking to me, horse freak? Bakugo growled, with small explosions popping from his hand. Pony flinched at the popping of his explosions. She rubbed her arm as she remembered his viciousness against her and her team in their class training exercise. But we must make plan. Otherwise no win. Suddenly a small explosion went off near her face, causing her to stumble backwards away from the blonde bomber. Looking up, she flinched under his usual rage-full eyes that pierced themselves into her soul. Don't get in my way with that villain! He screeched as he stormed away, leaving the quivering American all by herself to try and form a plan. You will pay for getting in my way, Deku. After I'm done with you, I'll go after that little freak you call a daughter next to remind you and her of your places. So, that's the reason he's even in this school? Ochako questioned with a raised eyebrow. Yeah. Izuku sighed, already done with today and just wanting to go back to the dorms and cuddle up with the two people he loved. So, 13th's your mom? Do you think it would be possible if I… Ochako said while kicking a loose stone, but before she could finish her sentence Izuku brought out a piece of paper with his mother's signature with an annoying smirk. Immediately her eyes became stars and snatched the paper from her friend's hand and put it away in a storage compartment. When I get married you're my maid of honor. Just tell me what dress to wear. Izuku and Ochako chuckled before getting back to the task at hand. Got a plan, Kayama? Izuku held his chin with his thumb and index finger and started mulling over their options. That was when Ochako chimed in with her suggestion. I say we go to Bakugo first and break his legs. Hard to be a hero without them. As tempting as that is, we can't use unnecessary force in a training exercise. Izuku sighed, though he was grateful that his friend was willing to go that far for him. Bakugo will most likely go straight for me, leaving Sinatori wide open. He'll be too busy with his hate boner for me that he'll completely ignore you. I'll distract him long enough for you to run past him and get to the bomb. If you need help, use your communicator to contact me. Izuku explained further. Despite it possibly being the only plan that could guarantee success, Ochako still didn't like that her friend would be putting himself in the line of fire. Heroes may enter the building now. All Might's voice came through the communicators. Izuku and Ochako nodded to each other and gave each other a small fist bump before entering. They wandered around for a bit before they started to hear the distant sounds of explosions getting louder and louder. The two nodded at each other, and Ochako quickly and quietly made her way to the bomb, leaving Izuku all by himself. His heart was racing and his hands were shaking, but he knew he couldn't back out now, so with a deep breath he yelled from the top of his lungs. Bakugo, you hickless coward! Come and get me! It didn't take the Bomberanian long to find him after that. Bakugo rocketed around the corner with an explosion pointed right at him, but Izuku was prepared for that. He grabbed the blonde by his arm and judo threw him to the floor. He quickly jumped out of the way as Bakugo got back up from the ground and launched another explosion at him. The explosion was big enough to cause a smokescreen to block both their visions. Come on, Deku! Don't dodge! Bakugo yelled, swiping the smoke to the side before running towards Izuku and delivered a right hook. I won't do too much damage that this fight stopped, but I'm gonna make you pay. Izuku ducked under the swing and delivered an uppercut to his chin, causing his head to be thrown backwards. I've been your punching bag for years. I've studied every move you've ever thought of in that thick skull of yours. Bakugo was caught off guard when Izuku grabbed him by the wrist and kicked him in the jaw. I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done with you threatening my family, so come at me, Bakugo. Show me your fear. DKU. He launched himself right at Izuku before redirecting Mineta to be behind him and attacked with a larger explosion, causing the greenette to be thrown through a wall. The blonde ran after him but quickly saw that there was no one there. He started getting angry with bigger explosions popping from his hands as he stood in the middle of the dark room. You won't stop me from becoming the #1 hero, Deku! The #1 hero, Katsuki? Izuku said in amusement as his voice seemed to be coming from every shadow in the darkly light room. This is bad comedy. I will, because I'm better than you. Katsuki's hands started to glow before he let off a blinding light. Stun grenade! The room lights up just in time for him to see Izuku rushing up to him with his finger needles pointed right at him. One more, he launches an explosion right at the greenette, causing him to crash into the wall, only this time not going through it. You can never defeat me, you bucking Deku, Bakugo said as he made his way to Izuku, ready to finish the fight. Yeah. Izuku coughed before making eye contact with his bully with a shit-eating grin on his face. That was the point. Suddenly the buzzer went off and All Might's voice came through the speakers. Hero team wins! Katsuki's blood went as cold as ice as the words rang in his head, before his eyes started twitching and his teeth ground together. His eyes went to the canisters on his arms and saw that they were glowing. With an evil grin he pointed one right at his grounded target. Stop, young Bakugo! The test is over! All Might yelled as Aizawa and Vlad King rushed to the building as fast as they could. I won't lose to a villain like DKU! With that he pulled the pin and unleashed the explosive power behind his weapon. Izuku felt the rush of heat to his entire body, and the blinding light assaulting his eyes before his world went black. Chapter 21. The observation room was silent as the classes of 1A and 1B watched as two medical robots carried Izuku to the nurse's office with Recovery Girl following closely behind them. Nobody said anything, especially Kyuka, who had gone completely catatonic when she saw the attack hit her boyfriend. Arie was also in a similar state of shock as she watched her father being carried away, her head slowly turning to the boy responsible for his current condition being ripped a new one by the three teachers present. "What the buck do you think you were doing?" Vlad King screamed. His body language screamed that he wanted to beat the boy into a bloody pulp for that stunt. He heard Papa Arie though, still watching the interaction, though the words around her seemed to be muffled with the exception of Bakugo's and the teachers. "You are perfectly aware of the conditions of allowing you to even be allowed into Yui, young Bakugo," Almight said with a face that would make most villains run. If those present could give the blonde anything, he stood his ground against a clearly pissed off Almight. "You'll be lucky if the board doesn't throw you out of UA for your actions today, let alone the possibility of jail time. I just hope that Kayama is alright by the end of this, and you don't face the wrath of his mothers," Aizawa muttered to himself, though from the blonde's face everyone could tell that he couldn't care less about what the teachers were telling him. He heard Papa. She growled within her mind. She was starting to shake with growing rage, fists clenched tightly, and her hair covered her slightly glowing red eyes. Gold wisps of energy and electricity seemed to sparking from them. "TCH, the bucking bastard shouldn't have gotten in my way then." That seemed to have been the straw that broke the camel's back, because as soon as those words left Katsuki's mouth, something snapped in the young girl. He heard Papa. She screamed in her head while letting out a feral screech that would tear apart anyone's vocal cords. Arie bolted towards the blonde so fast that those watching would have called it flash stepping. Time seemed to dilate as the young girl cocked her right fist as far back as she could, and at the moment she was at her max, Arie threw her fist forward into an uppercut right into the blonde. Sadly for him, due to her height, that meant that the punch landed right into his crotch, and everyone watched as he crumbled to the ground like a sack of bricks. Though the boys were wholly unsympathetic for him, they did wince and cover their own manhoods in shared pain, especially when they heard something crack. Whether it was Arie's knuckles cracking or the boy's testicles, they wouldn't, and didn't want to, know. The moment Bakugo landed on the ground, Arie leapt on top of him and started beating his face in, each punch that landed tore the gloves of her costume apart from the force she was hitting him with. Blow after blow, Arie's punches grew stronger to the point that it caused blood to start gushing from his nose, mouth, and her knuckles, staining both her costume and hands red. But she didn't stop, as she just kept beating the blonde who had made her and her father's life a living hell for years. Unbeknownst to Arie, her whole body started to glow white, with the golden lightning from her eyes sparking more forcefully now. The light produced a powerful aura that caused all present to feel their knees buckle beneath them. It wasn't the usual sign of her quirk activating, that much was clear to Aizawa and Kyuka. But whatever the energy was, it only seemed to increase her strength even more, to the point the concrete beneath them started to crack from the force of the strikes. Eventually both Kyuka and Momo snapped out of their shock and rushed to restrain the young girl. It was easier said than done, as Arie seemed to have gained the strength of 20 men. After managing to pry her off of the Bakugo, they stepped back and the white light seemed to disappear as well as the electricity. "Put me down! He has to pay!" she screamed as she tried to squirm out of her mother's grasp. "You little hitch!" Bakugo grunted as he managed to get himself to one knee. He looked at the girl and pointed the other arm gauntlet at her with his finger on the pin. "You're bucking dead!" Kyuka held Arie close while Momo moved in front of them to shield the two from him with her body. He never got the chance, as a massive hand came down and crushed the gauntlet before he could even fire it, causing everyone to look at a very disappointed and angry Almight. "Young Jiru, go take young Arie and yourself to the infirmary while we deal with things here," Almight said. The two took their leave, with Momo looking like she was wanting to go with them. Seeing this, the number one hero smiled knowingly at her and nodded in their direction. "If you wish, you can go with them as well, young Yaoyorozu." The Ravionet nodded back in appreciation and rushed to catch up with the young family. This left the rest of the class, who took this as a sign to leave as well. That just left the three furious teachers to drag Bakugo to the principal's office. The trip to the nurse's office felt like an eternity, as each step towards it only seemed to get longer. Somewhere along the way, Momo caught up to them and joined them on their journey. The state that the three of them were in would best be described as shit. Kyuka was still shaken seeing the state her boyfriend was in as he was carried out. Arie was rubbing her knuckles trying to ease the soreness from them, and finally Momo, who felt her heart drop when the massive explosion occurred and looked like someone who saw someone die in front of them. Eventually they made it to the office where Recovery Girl had just stepped out. She looked at them and knew what they were doing there. "He's fine, relatively speaking." "What's the damage?" Kyuka asked, her voice quietly almost like she didn't want to know in case she may not like the answer. "He'll live if that's what you're worried about," the old heroine sighed. "He's got some first and second degree burns across his body, but most of the damage was nullified thanks to whatever his costume was made out of. Broken bones that I managed to heal and a slight concussion. There's some other injuries that I couldn't heal due to him not having the energy to spare and being unconscious, but if you want to see him, then go right ahead." She looked at them and saw the blood dripping from Arie's fist. She looked questioningly at the young woman with Kyuka giving the elderly hero a weary smile. "Does it make you feel better if I say that the majority of it is not her blood?" No, it does not," Recovery Girl groaned before inspecting the girl's hands after wiping the blood away. Arie had torn some skin from her knuckles and was bleeding a bit from them, but was easily fixed with a quick kiss to the forehead. The trio entered the office and quietly went to Izuku with Arie cuddling up on his chest while wrapping his arms carefully around herself. Kyuka and Momo meanwhile sat to his left and watched his chest rise and fall. The room's silence draped over the three, only being broken up by the ticking of the wall-mounted clock and Izuku's light breathing. Kyuka's eyes were locked onto her boyfriend's face, with her expression being a mixture of relief, worry, and silent anger. Though Momo couldn't tell if it was directed at Bakugo or Izuku, it seemed like both, but she wasn't sure. They stayed like that for a few minutes before she heard the purplet next to her mumble. "You should have skipped class, idiot." Momo hummed questioningly as her gaze shifted to the girl that he had a crush on, her female friend, wondering where that came from, though from the subtle flinch she received the Ravenet could guess that she wasn't supposed to hear it. "Nezu gave him a chance to not participate today and completely avoid Bakugo, but this idiot decided to fight him regardless." Kyuka grumbled before her face softened. "But it wouldn't be Izuku if he just ran away, one of the many dumb things that I love about him." The Yaoyorozu heiress nodded without even realizing and turned back to looking at the boy that she had a crush on, her male friend. She agreed with Gyro on the matter that the boy's determination was something to admire, but she could also admit that if he ended up in hospital one more time, she may invest in bubble wrap to contain him in. She sat in silence for a moment before looking at the purplet. "Excuse me, Gyro, but—" "Kyuka," she interrupted, making Momo look at her questioningly. "Just call me Kyuka. We're friends and I know my idiot will want you to call him by his name too." Alright Kyuka, then you too can do the same." The Ravionet stuttered, her cheeks heating up and her chest feeling warm for some odd reason. Coughing into her fist, she continued. "Anyways, may I ask why Bakugo seems to dislike Izuku?" "It's because the rabid dog has such a big superiority and inferiority complex that I'm starting to think he might be compensating for a few inches." Kyuka sighed, though grinned when she heard Momo sputter at the joke. "Izuku used to be friends with him, if you could believe it." Their mothers were friends when they were children, so introduced the two to each other as children as well. "From what Izuku told me, it started spiraling downwards when Bakugo got his quirk. He got his ego inflated by everyone around him saying that he could do no wrong. He still saw Izuku as a sort of friend for a while before Izuku's quirk came in." The punk girl growled through gritted. Memories of Izuku confessing all of this and more while breaking down on the couch played through her head. Everyone, bearing his mother, thought of him as a future villain because of his quirk relying on fear. They would beat him down both metaphorically and literally until he learned his place, as they said. "I'm sure you can piece together the timeline from there." Momo sat there taking in the information and felt unbridled fury towards the blonde. She was angry for her friend, but her heart broke a little for an unknown reason. Unbeknownst to them, Arie had been curling tighter into her father. As she listened to the story, she had lived through some of it, and knew how aggressive Bakugo could get. She could remember every punch, bruise, and scar that he received by protecting her from the bullies. She could remember every vile and disgusting word they spat about or to her father. She remembered how on one Christmas Eve she begged Santa to bring her father happiness, saying that she could live without presents for the rest of her life if he did. It took a while, and she almost thought he didn't hear her, but later in the year Kyuka came into their lives and became her mother. She'd do anything for the family that chose her, but she felt so useless at times like this. How could she be a hero if she can't keep her father safe? So, she fell on her prayer again and begged anyone who could hear her, please, please heal Papa. She didn't expect an answer the moment she finished asking. A voice whispered into her ear, a voice very similar to her own but sounded much older and almost ethereal. The words this other voice spoke resonated with her for some unknown reason, and in her mind she repeated the words spoken to her. Reverse what those have broken. Bring back what is mine. Use my words that have been lost, misspoken. Bring back the one I love, turn back the hands of time. At the end, a single tear ran from her face and began to fall onto her father. As it fell, it took on a golden hue and splashed onto his chest right above his heart. It was silent for a moment before the teardrop and Arie's horn exploded in golden energy, bathing the room in golden light. Kyuka and Momo screeched and ducked out of the way of the energy while screaming Izuku's and Arie's names. When the energy eventually calmed down and the light returned to normal, the two girls watched as Izuku slowly opened his eyes and stood up like nothing had happened, though all failed to notice what appeared to be white dove-like wings that faded into red, dissipating into ash-like partials from her back. Izuku looked down at his daughter, hugging him like he would disappear if she let go, and leaned in to hear her mumbling, "Don't leave me, Papa, don't leave me." Returning the hug, he kissed the top of her head. If he cared to notice at that time, he would have noticed the cutting scars around his arms and wrists were gone. "I'll never leave you, my little apple, never." Soon Kyuka joined in the hugging, with Momo placing a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. None were aware of the camera in the room that had captured everything. "Back before the war in heaven, the goddess of life had handed me a gift. She gave me a baby angel she made from the clouds of creation, my DNA and all things precious," the demon Izuku revealed with a soft voice. "When asked what I'd like to name the little angel that I called my daughter, I went with the name Arie. When war broke out due to a god that betrayed us, the gods and Arie fought off the betrayer, and in doing so sacrificed herself in order to cast them out." Nezu looked at the alternative version of his student and spotted tears pricking the corners of his eyes. "I later found my daughter dying, and with the last of her abilities and life force allowed herself to have variants all across the multiverse. Sadly, as a consequence of her traumatic death, it has caused all her variants to suffer in one way or another." Nezu frowned as he heard the story before recalling something that was said. "Wait, you said that the gods and Arie fought this betrayer. Why was Arie there?" A sharp-toothed smile appeared on the demon's lips as he replied with the pride of a father. "Arie was always special, and she did something that no angel or demon has ever done before or since." In his office, Nezu sat watching the camera that was in the nurse's office and smiled to himself while remembering what the demon Izuku had revealed to him yesterday. The sight of the young family brought warmth to his heart and reminded him that not all humans were deserving of subjugation. "So, that's just a small portion of the goddess of time's power," Nezu mused with a massive grin. "Fascinating." He turned his thoughts away from that and towards what he had gone through with Bakugo just a moment ago, with him reminding the consequences of the stunts he pulled in that exercise. The Chimera had watched what had happened in the observation room with his niece, and needless to say, he was about to skin the boy alive. Pointing such a weapon to his niece and future successor almost sent him into a murderous frenzy. Using excessive force in a training exercise that could have led to death, strike 1. Threatening a child with a weapon in the presence of staff, strike 2. He would have expelled him on the spot had it not been for the decision of the board and the 3-strike system. So he just reminded him and the board that he was on his final strike and any infraction would lead to his expulsion. The strike system, just the thought of that ridiculous thing made him scoff. All this just so they would have a powerful student with a flashy quirk, and could possibly make it big and fill their pockets more. He was all for second chances, but even he could see that Bakugo was a lost cause. He did not want another endeavor running around. "Thank you very much." He took delight in their vain attempts to sway his opinion, and even more delight as he reminded them that at the end of it was the boy's parents that could take him out of school and they could do nothing about it. Nevertheless, he needed the current board gone if he was going to protect his niece and her family. Sadly, he couldn't do that without a case to launch against them. He was a patient creature. He was more than willing to bide his time. In a dingy apartment building in the USA, a man with wild black hair watched his TV in the dark. Empty bottles of alcohol strewn about the living room and an ashtray filled with dead cigarettes sat next to the man. The fight between Florida and New York has reached its end, with New York managing to push Florida back, but not without Florida giving the statement of "you got lucky, but wait for the parachuting laser gators to drop by," the news reporter said as the image behind her changed to a picture of UA. In other news, the famous Japanese hero school UA University has recently been attacked by a group of villains calling themselves the League of Villains, led by a man identified as Tamura Shigaraki. The image changed again to a picture of a top-down view of the students coming out of the domed building, with one green-haired boy being loaded into an ambulance. The image caused the man to lean forward a bit to get a better view and for the TV to highlight his diamond-shaped freckles. Only one student was hurt, but the school has stated that he has made a full recovery. Now on to tonight's game with Texas versus Oklahoma. The man stopped listening to whatever the woman on TV was and instead focused on the image of the boy being loaded into the ambulance. So, that useless villain decided to go above his station, huh? Maybe you can finally be useful to me, Izuku. He stood up and went to his computer to book a flight to Japan and also purchased a ticket for the sports festival that was going to be held. After that, he picked up his phone and started texting someone before moving into his bedroom to start packing. He needed to have a few words with his son. Chapter 22. It was time for the sports festival to begin, and Class 1A was in their locker room waiting for the announcement for them to enter the field. On one side of the room, the girls gathered to talk about what the festival may consist of, and on other unrelated topics, the boys on the other hand were forming alliances and burning bridges with each other due to one simple question asked by Siro. "I'm telling you it's milk then cereal," Ojiro stated while glaring at Izuku. "Cereal before milk, tail boy," Izuku sneered. "At least you're not a heathen like Kirishima." The offending boy threw his arms into the air. "What's wrong about putting a little protein powder into my cereal? It's a war crime," both boys yelled. "Look, just admit that you are all wrong and that pancakes are the superior breakfast," Sato said as he shook his head. Koda and Aoyama nodded their heads in agreement with his statement. "I still think toast is good," Shuji murmured, with Tokoyami and Dark Shadow voicing their agreement. The bickering continued, with Todoroki looking off into the distance. To the outsider he looked disinterested, but in reality, "Cold soba I crave for your touch upon my lips." It all came crashing down when Kaminari decided it was his time to throw his hat into the ring. "What about cereal then, Gatorade?" The rest of the boys looked at Kaminari with utter disgust, with some looking genuinely worried for him. Seeing this, the electricity quirk user quickly tried to explain himself. "It's something my sister does from time to time. I'm just asking for her sake." "Still doesn't help your case, bro," Kirishima said with a shake of his head. Off on the other side of the room, the girls watched the boys' argument with a slight shake of their heads. Ochako turned to Kyuka, who was playing with her ear jacks to distract herself. "Hey Jairu, where's Arie?" "She's sitting with the other teachers in their booth," Kyuka replied. A light snicker escaped her lips. "Haruki said she wanted her Arie cuddle time. No fair," Toru wailed, her arms flapping around. "I want some Arie cuddle time too." Kyuka just smiled and shook her head. It never ceases to amaze her or Izuku just how her classmates adored their little angel. "Class 1A, please start making your way to the field." "Repeat, Class 1A, please start making your way to the field," an automated voice called into the room, getting everyone's attention. "Alright folks, it's showtime," Izuku called as he and Momo led the class out of the waiting room and to the field. "Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this year's sports festival," the class could hear present Mick's voice from the corridor, the roar of the crowd following shortly after. "With me is the forever tired and grumpy Mr. Caffeine himself, Eraserhead. Call me Mr. Caffeine again, Mike, and the police will never stop finding your body," the perpetually tired teacher droned. "Also, how did you convince me to do this again?" "Because I bribed a certain unicorn child to give you the puppy dog eyes in exchange for my apple pie." The class collectively chuckled at the admission, especially when they remembered when Arie came bouncing into the dorm with a whole apple pie in hand. Now, without any further ado, for the class that stared down an army of villains, put your hands together for Class 1A. The class walked out onto the field and gazed at the amount of pro heroes that were cheering them on. Izuku and Kyuka looked closely at one of the private booths and spotted Arie with the other teachers cheering for them. You may not know them as much, but they can pack an equal punch. For the sister class, give it up for Class 1B. As announced, Class 1B walked onto the field with the exact amount of applause. However, Bakugo and Monoma were scowling as they exited the tunnel. To them it sounded like the applause were slightly less than what Class 1A received, and that pissed them off. Next up, General Studies Classes C, D, and E. Izuku looked over and saw Hatsum, decked out in her support gear, and her class walking out. And finally, the business classes I, J, and K. As the last of the students made it to the field, the cheers grew louder. Give it up for all of you. A.'s first-year contestants. Due to her sensitive hearing, Kyuka winced in pain from all the noise around her before feeling her boyfriend's hands cover her ears. She sighed and smiled contentedly while resting an earphone jack on his chest to listen to his heartbeat. Acting in the role of chief umpire, make some noise, the forever stunning R-rated hero, Midnight. Present mic announced, causing the stadium to go wild. Most of the men and some of the women in the crowd cleared and wolf whistled as Nomuri sauntered onto the stage. Izuku had to resist the urge to not scream at the crowd and some of the students for making comments about his mother. My God, Mrs. Midnight is so hot. Mineta drooled before turning to Izuku. You're lucky to have a hottie like Midnight as your mom. Make another comment about my mother and I'll peel your hick like a banana. The greenette spoke calmly. The great-headed boy shuddered before clamping his mouth shut. Now for the student pledge, Midnight announced, though anyone that knew her could see the growing tick mark on her head. We have Katsuki Bakugo from Class 1B. Well, this can only go well, Cyril muttered as the rest of the class sweat dropped and Bakugo made his way to the mic. Ha! Of course they'd pick someone from the superior class. Monoma laughed, earning sighs of exasperation from his classmates. Show them what Class 1B is all about. I just want to say, Bakugo began in front of a silent crowd and first-year student body. I'm gonna win. That, evidently, was not what Monoma had expected given his stunned expression that quickly turned to anger as the other classes started booing the blonde bomber. What didn't help was the comments that were being made not only about Bakugo, but also about Class 1B. Man, that guy has an ego. What makes him think he's gonna win? Well, I'm not making him any babies. Phrasing Hatsum, please? You think all of 1B is like that? I dunno, man, probably? I mean, that other blonde guy has been trying to get everyone against 1A, so it might be. Maybe 1A isn't the class with an ego problem. Those comments turned the copy quirk user's face red while the rest of his classmates just looked just as pissed off as the other courses. Way to go, asshole, now everyone is against us. Kendo scowled, just one moment away from bashing the egotistical blonde into the ground. He either didn't care or listen because he just walked back to his spot and stood there without a care in the world. His nonchalant mannerism seemed to upset the student body more as their comments became more harsh towards him and his class. Now with that invigorating speech out of the way, let's see what you will be facing off against, Midnight said, spinning the wheel before landing on the chosen activity. The students milled about the opening as they waited for the countdown for the obstacles race, many getting some stretches in before they had to run and do who knows what to get to the finish line. So, are we still in agreement from this morning? Izuku asked, doing some stretches. Yes, Kyuka said, bringing her knee up and hugging it to her chest before mirroring the action with her other leg. As much as I want to work with you, Aizawa, I want to prove myself in this tournament. Just making sure, dear. The greenette shrugged before a small smirk pulled at his lips. I just wanted to make sure that Arie knows that it was your idea and not mine. Kyuka stopped her stretching for a moment before shooting her boyfriend a glare. Her eyes drifted momentarily past him before widening and locking onto their new target. Izuku followed where his girlfriend was looking at and saw Momo doing her stretches by holding her arms above her head and bending her back backwards. What caught their attention was that her sports shirt was unzipped and revealing her sports bra. That thing is barely containing Momo's yamomos, both Izuku and Kyuka thought, a blush forming on their cheeks. Alright, students. Please take your places, Midnight announced with the various courses took spots around the starting line. When she was sure everyone was in possession, Midnight started her countdown. 3. Izuku got ready and looked at his girlfriend. See you at the finish line. 2. You too, Izuku. Kyuka smiled, getting into a runner's sprint position. 1. A horn blared signaling the start. Everyone immediately rushed towards the entrance as fast as they could. Up in the commentator's booth, President Mike grinned excitedly and screamed into his microphone. And they're off! So, Eraserhead, what should the contestants worry about? The door, Aizawa deadpanned. At said door, the students were all pushing and shoving each other to try and make it out the tunnel, not unlike the break-in that happened not long ago, but unlike last time each member of 1A was prepared and had launched themselves over and cleared the students. Todoroki freezing the ground and surfing on the ice, Momo creating a pole and vaulting over the competition, or Kirishima just sending it, and somehow ending farther than Tsu. No matter what method was used, the entirety of Class 1A made it through the first obstacle. Izuku landed into a roll before sprinting ahead as fast as he could. He really wished he could use his support gear, but he had to adhere to the agreement. He wasn't allowed to use any gear in the first round, only use the support gear in its sniper mode, then he would finally get to use it properly in the final round. Until then, running was all he could do. It wasn't long before he and the rest of the competition reached the first hurdle, though he did take in some satisfaction when a robotic fist punched Mineta away when he tried to hitch a ride on Momo's back. And the little listeners have reached the first obstacle, the robot inferno. Most of the student body froze at the sight of the 0-pointer looming over them, while a small army of 1, 2, and 3-pointers charged at them. Momo wasted no time in creating some rollerblades and skating. She also picked up Kyuka in an underarm carry and carried the purplet off with her. Kyuka for a brief moment felt like either a handbag or an uncooperative cat with the way she dangled. Either way, it didn't stop the blush that formed on her face, though whether or not OT was because of embarrassment or finding being carried by Momo was hot, she didn't know. Todoroki saw this and attempted to follow after them, using his eyes to generate a trail for him to slide across at greater speeds. His path was cut off by another 0-pointer who tried to slow him down. Todoroki looked at the Goliath impassively, not bothered by its intrusion. Pathetic, the scared student said, and in an instant a chill filled the air. Todoroki swiped his hand across the ground. A glacial wave erupted and covered the attacking 0-pointer in a thick layer of ice. You were barely an inconvenience. With that impressive show of power, he sped through, running under the legs of the frozen monstrosity. This garnered the attention of the others. Hey, he stopped the 0-pointer! There's a way through! Quick, go under it! Todoroki glanced back over his shoulder, not really believing that those behind him thought it would be that easy. I wouldn't do that, I froze it while it was off balance. And just as he said, the frozen 0-pointer's legs started to collapse under its own weight. The metal and ice groaned as the chassis lurched forward. More and more ice shattered, causing several chunks of the 0-pointer to break apart and shower the field with debris. Many of the students scrambled to avoid getting crushed. Bakugo merely growled in annoyance and launched himself into the air. With a great application of his quirk, the ash-blonde bomber maneuvered effortlessly as he dodged the metal and ice chucks as they fell. When he came to the main body of the 0-pointer, Bakugo unleashed a massive explosion with both hands, propelling himself over the head of the robot and ahead of Todoroki. How about that, viewers? Todoroki just froze a 0-pointer in its tracks, while Bakugo flew up and over its remains. The two began to speed up as they raced each other to reach the front of the pack, leaving behind everyone as they chased after Momo and Kyuka. From the remains of the frozen 0-pointer, loud thuds and heavy slamming could be heard from the metal chassis. Metal began to groan and tear apart when, like a chest-burster, Kirishima busted out from the downed robot's body, his hardening quirk fully activated. Damn it, Todoroki! Someone could have been killed by that! The redhead bellowed out. Another slam was heard next to him as a pair of metal arms tore through the 0-pointer's chassis, revealing that Tetsu had also nearly been crushed by the debris. The hell was that? Not very manly of that bastard to drop something like that on us, the steel-bodied young man roared. Izuku rolled out of the way of an attack from a 1-pointer with the robot's arms smashing into the dirt of the course and kicking up a small dust cloud. He glanced to his side and noticed something on the ground, a piece of the robot Todoroki knocked down. "You just won't let up, huh, big guy?" the greenette said while picking the scrap piece of robot up, grunting from the awkward angle with which he needed to carry it. "Then I guess I'll just have to force you." He maneuvered round another attack before slamming the sharp end of the metal into the one-pointer's neck. It spazzed and sparked before it died, leaving Izuku to drag the metal scrap to the next obstacle. As he approached, he saw a large caissson with little island platforms contacted by cables. He saw some trying to tightrope walk over them, and some trying to figure out other ways to get across. "Welcome to the second obstacle that our little listeners have to face," President Mike announced. "Welcome to the pit." Hisashi was already getting bored of this farce that this school called a sports festival. He couldn't help but roll his eyes as the competing students used their quirks. The invisible chick was useless. The bird-head boy's shadow was monstrous. Large hands were pathetic. He let out a frustrated sigh at seeing the two hardening quirk users. While the quirks themselves were useful even from his spot in the stands, he knew the ones using them were utter idiots. A good majority of them were either weak, villainous, or just straight pathetic. The only ones he bothered to pay attention to were Todoroki, Bakugo, and Yaoyorozu. Todoroki was the son of the number 2 hero and was demonstrating his strong quirk for the masses. He commended the boy on his attack on the large robot but was slightly disappointed when it didn't get rid of the useless fodder permanently. Yaoyorozu was also impressed with her quirk, but he had to deduct points for helping the girl with earphone jacks. He honestly believed she should have left her and possibly allowed the purplet to potentially be crushed by Todoroki's attack. He knew Bakugo was strong as his ex-wife was friends with her mother, and the future villain she spawned was friends with the boy directly. Hisashi shifted slightly in his seat at the thought of his deceased ex-wife. When he gave her the ultimatum about giving the villainous spawn away or simply abandoning him, she gave him her response in a very bloody manner. He looked back up in time to see the blue-haired engine boy holding his arms up and to the side as he jumped on the rope. With his engines roaring, he began to slide across the line like a tightrope and struggling to maintain his balance with such an act. "Well, at least he's asserting his dominance over the rope with that pose." "Really, Mike?" Hisashi rolled his eyes at the obnoxious idiot that was commentating before his gaze fell upon the villainous spawn. He watched as he made his way over the tightrope, while dragging a big hunk of metal from one of the robots. He hissed as he watched. The boy was useless to him and subsequently re-destro, but he smiled as he remembered the deal he made with Jiren. Hisashi would take his son and hand him over to Dr. Garaki for experimentation for Project Nomu, and would later be paid handsomely for it. The best part, in his opinion, was that no one would care if he took him, as all he'd have to say was that he was the boy's father. Besides, if the villainous spawn refused to cooperate, he could always remind him of his place. He continued to watch as they reached the last obstacle. He'd give it one more match before confronting him. "Welcome to the minefield, everyone. Just like the real things, if you step on them they'll explode," President Mike announced before continuing. "But remember, they might be loud and flashy, but they're not all that powerful, just enough to make you wet your pants." Was that last bit really necessary? Izuku thought as he finally arrived at the minefield with students already trying to make their way across. He spotted Kyuka using her quirk as a form of echolocation by having them extend into the dirt and sending small vibrations to locate the buried mines. He watched as the others tried to slowly make their way without tripping them until he heard an explosion not too far away. He saw that when the mine went off, the student was sent stumbling to the ground and landed on their butt. That explosion gave the greenette an idea. Using the scrap he procured, he started digging up the mines near him before carefully placing them into a pile. Once he was satisfied with the amount of mines he'd collected, he took 3 steps back and readied his scrap shield. "Kyuka is going to have my ear after this." Sending a prayer to his future self, he rushed forward and jumped onto the mines. The resulting explosion not only launched Izuku high and fast into the air but also shook the ground, with many of the students looking and gawking at the green-haired madman. "What the hell was that?" "Probably one of my students doing something stupid," Eraserhead commented before seeing Izuku flying through the air and sighed. "Problem child. Look at that, folks. Class 1AS Izuku Kayama is soaring over the competition." As Izuku flew, he easily caught up with Todoroki and Bakugo. Seeing as he was about to hit the ground, he slammed his scrape down onto the ground and set off another mine, causing Todoroki and Bakugo to go flying. Bucking Deku! Bakugo screeched before giving chase. Todoroki didn't say anything and instead just ran after the boy. He rolled along the ground before running in a dead sprint to the finish line with his bully and cold classmate catching up quickly. With the finish just ahead, Izuku pushed everything he had into his sprint. And the winner is... Mike paused for dramatic effect. Izuku Midoriya! The crowd cleared as the greenette made it to the stadium panting and all he wanted to flop onto the floor but instead got an ear jacks to the ear. He screamed as his ear was almost blown out and looked to see the unamused face of his girlfriend. Of all the idiotic things you could have done, you did that! Izuku flinched at that, still holding his ear. If you ever do something like that again, I'll kill you, revive you and kill you again! Izuku looked away for a moment before being kissed by Kyuka. However, good job on winning, Han. Izuku smiled and held his girlfriend close. Oh, lovers quarrel on the field. Hearing present Mike caused the couple to remember that they were in public and were being broadcasted all over the country. Quickly separating, they tried to calm their blushes but were unsuccessful with the giggles from the crowd and student body. They could already hear the teasing from their parents. Midnight suppressed a giggle and instead chose to continue with the tournament. After getting everyone's attention and spinning the wheel, it eventually landed on the next event. All right, dearies, Midnight said, throwing her hand into the air. Your next event will be...
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.